These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery, CBD for sleep and pain relief. More info is available at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Ground News, a well-rounded perspective for news readers. More info at ground.news/Tom. Angie, for any project on your to-do list. More info at angie.com. Dinovite, a whole food supplement for your pet's immune system. More info at dinovite.com. And ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom.
Today we're reading from David Blight's book, Frederick Douglass, Prophet of Freedom. This is from the introduction. In his speech at the dedication of the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., September 24, 2016, President Barack Obama delivered what he termed a, quote, clear-eyed view of a tragic and triumphant history of black Americans in the United States. He spoke of a history that is central to the larger American story, one that is both contradictory and extraordinary. He likened the African American experience to the infinite depths of Shakespeare and Scripture. The, quote, embrace of truth as best we can know it, said the president, is, quote, where real patriotism lies. Naming some of the major pivots of the country's past, Obama wrapped up his central theme in a remarkable sentence about the Civil War era. Quote, we've buttoned up our Union blues to join the fight for our freedom. We've railed against injustice for decade upon decade, a lifetime of struggle and progress and enlightenment that we see etched in Frederick Douglass's mighty leonine gaze, end quote. How Americans react to Douglass's gaze, indeed how we gaze back at his visage, and more important, how we read him, appropriate him, or engage his legacies, informs how we use our past to determine who we are. Douglass's life and writing emerged from nearly the full scope of the 19th century, representative of the best and the worst in the American spirit. Douglass constantly probed the ironies of America's contradictions over slavery and race. Few Americans use Shakespeare and the Bible to comprehend his story and that of his people as much as Douglass. And there may be no better example of an American radical patriot than the slave who became a lyrical prophet of freedom, natural rights, and human equality. Obama channeled Douglass in his dedication speech, knowingly or not. So do many people today. Born Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey, a slave, in Talbot County, Maryland, in February 1818, the future Frederick Douglass was the son of Harriet Bailey, one of 5 daughters of Betsy Bailey, and with some likelihood his mother's white owner. He saw his mother for the last time in 1825, though he hardly knew her. She died the following year. Douglass lived 20 years as a slave and nearly 9 years as a fugitive slave subject to recapture. From the 1840s to his death in 1895, he attained international fame as an abolitionist, editor, orator of almost unparalleled signature, and the author of 3 autobiographies that are classics of the genre. As a public man, he began his abolitionist career 2 decades before America would divide and fight a civil war over slavery that he openly welcomed. Douglass was born in a backwater of the slave society of the South just as steamboats appeared in bays and on American rivers, and before the telegraph, the railroad, and the rotary press changed human mobility and consciousness. He died after the emergence of electric lights, the telephone, and the invention of the phonograph. The renewed orator and traveler loved and used most of these elements of modernity and technology. Douglas was the most photographed American of the 19th century, explained in this book, and especially by the intrepid research of 3 other scholars I write upon. Although it can never really be measured, he may also have been, along with Mark Twain, the most widely traveled American public figure of his century. By the 1890s, in sheer miles and countless number of speeches, he had few rivals as a lecturer in the golden age of oratory. It is likely that more Americans heard Frederick Douglass speak than any other public figure of his time. Indeed, to see or hear Douglass became a kind of wonder of the American world. He struggled as well with the pleasures and perils of fame as much as anyone else in his century, with the possible exceptions of General Ulysses S. Grant or P.T. Barnum. Douglass's dilemma with fame was a matter of decades, not merely of moments, and fraught with racism. The orator and writer lived to see and interpret black emancipation, to work actively for women's rights long before they were achieved, to realize the civil rights triumphs and tragedies of Reconstruction, and to witness and contribute to America's economic and international expansion in the Gilded Age. He lived to the age of lynching and Jim Crow laws, when America collapsed into retreat from the real victories and revolutions in race relations that he had helped to win. He played a pivotal role in America's second founding out of the apocalypse of the Civil War, and he very much wished to see himself as a founder and defender of the Second American Republic. In one lifetime of anti-slavery, literary, and political activism, Douglass was many things, and the set of apparent paradoxes makes his story so attractive to biographers, as well as to so many constituencies today. He was a radical thinker and a proponent of classic 19th century political liberalism. At different times, he hated and loved his country. He was a ferocious critic of the United States and all its hypocrisies, but also, after emancipation, became a government bureaucrat, a diplomat, and a voice for territorial expansion. He strongly believed in self-reliance and demanded an activist interventionist government at all levels to free slaves, defeat the Confederacy, and to protect black citizens against terror and discrimination. Douglass was a serious constitutional thinker, and few Americans have ever analyzed race with more poignancy and nuance than this mostly self-taught genius with words. He was a radical editor, writer, and activist. The book Frederick Douglass by David Blight.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Hey, TGIF, Shabbat Shalom, Juma Mubarak. It's Friday. It's Anything Goes Friday. We will have one guest today in about 30 minutes, maybe 20, about 30 minutes. Congressman Joe Walsh, or former Congressman Joe Walsh, Republican, is going to drop by. We're going to have an interesting conversation about why is the January 6th revolt, coup, attempt to bring down democracy. Why isn't it considered an act of war by more GOPers, including a statement that Donald Trump made yesterday? We'll get to that in about a half hour. And I've got rants about Joe Manchin in the second hour and voting rights in the third hour. But, you know, mostly it's just going to be you and me all day. 202-808-9925 is our telephone number. Anything Goes Friday, whatever's on your mind. We can talk about are pigeons actually robots of the planet Xenu, or we can talk about, you know, the subtleties of the filibuster or the intricacies of the Supreme Court not issuing actual opinions anymore, but doing shadow decisions and stuff. You know, there's all kinds of stuff. But I want to start out with my rant from the Hartmann Report today. I think it's one of the better ones that I've done. I spent a lot of time on this yesterday afternoon and this morning. I write them when I get home in the afternoon. Typically, it takes me right up until around 5 or 6 in the afternoon when I'll go catch Rachel Maddow's show, but and sometimes Chris Hayes. But And then in the morning, we get up in the morning at 5:30, and the first thing I do is just go through and read it one more time and fine-tune it and tweak it and then publish it and then record it, for our subscribers. But anyhow, it starts out, the whole premise of this thing, and the title of it, in fact, is conservatives and billionaires want you to confuse rights of citizenship for welfare, which, by the way, is exactly what Joe Manchin is doing. I mean, Joe Manchin, he's echoing this thing that we've been hearing since the Reagan administration. Really, we were hearing it before that. We used to hear this from the John Birch Society, right? Democrats with their Social Security. Now, keep in mind, John Birch Society, 1950s. This was before Medicare. Social Security is socialism. It's going to lead us down the road to Soviet communism. And there were a lot of us back then, and in the years since, Reagan picked up the mantra, of course, and it's been the mantra of the conservatives ever since. And even to some extent, Bill Clinton picked this up with his end of welfare as we know it rhetoric, is that things that, what Joe Manchin said, this kind of crystallizes it. He said that, free college for students and eyeglasses for seniors will produce what he calls an entitlement society. Well, what the hell does that mean? What he's really saying is everybody will be on welfare. And this is the grand hysterical fear of the Koch network and the rest of the right-wing billionaire class that, oh my God, we're going to have to pay taxes to provide things to people that we don't even know or particularly like. And what they miss is this very real distinction, and I ranted about this a couple of days ago, and I think it's really worth putting a punctuation mark on. They miss this very real distinction between what is a social safety net on the one hand and what are the rights of citizenship, the things you expect to have from government as a citizen of a developed country. Now, the welfare stuff, this is society's obligation. You could argue it's a moral obligation. It's also a practical obligation to catch people when they fall. We live in a largely capitalist society, and capitalism about every 6 to 10 years has a hiccup and goes into a recession. It's predictable as the rain coming. You can see these cycles literally going back to the founding of the Republic. And when capitalism has its hiccups, people fall out of the system. People lose their jobs. They lose their health care. They lose their ability to pay their mortgage. They can't afford to feed their kids. Welfare is there to fill in those cracks. It's to catch people when they fall. It's a pretty straightforward thing. Right? Another example of welfare is FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. When you fall, not because capitalism hiccuped or not because, you got sick, but when you fall because a hurricane hit you, or, the Texas power grid has had its privatized owners sucking profit out of it so long that it's so fragile that when they get a deep freeze down there, it shuts down the whole damn state. Well, again, you fell, so FEMA comes in and says, okay, we'll give you a trailer to live in, and we'll give you a stipend, and we'll bring you water, and we'll get you some food. That's welfare. These are intended to be short-term solutions to crises. Now, the rights of citizenship are a completely different thing. And that's what Joe Manchin apparently doesn't understand. The rights of citizenship include things like good public schools, decent roads, police and fire protection, and a functioning government paid for with tax dollars that maintains it all, that keeps it all going. This is the structural stuff. And some of the structural stuff has to do with what you could arguably call welfare, say Social Security and Medicare, but we pay into it through our entire lives. We're just getting our own money back. So, I would say that that's part of the rights of citizenship too. The rights of citizenship are what provide the foundations for a functioning society itself. The physical infrastructure is what makes normal life possible. And the fancier and more sophisticated that infrastructure is, the more vibrant a nation's economy becomes. This is why Dwight Eisenhower, the Republican president in the 1950s, built the Eisenhower Interstate Highway System. Yeah, you can now more easily go and visit Grandpa and Grandma. And I remember, I was a kid in the 1950s. We used to drive from Lansing up to Newaygo, Michigan every weekend. And it was about a 2-hour drive on the old, 2-lane roads. And then they put in Highway 96, and we could just hop on 96 in Lansing and be in Grand Rapids in 35, 40 minutes, and boom, there, and then drive another 30 miles up to Newaygo and visit Grandpa and Grandma. Yeah, that was wonderful. That happened in the 50s as a result of Eisenhower building freeways, as I recall. But more than that, it facilitated commerce. Suddenly, trucking became a big thing. You didn't have to, just transport everything by rail, and, and the rail lines don't go everywhere. The highways did pretty much go everywhere. And that created such an economic boom in the 1950s and 60s and 70s that the taxes on all that economic activity paid down our national debt from the 130% of GDP it was at the end of World War II, which is where it's at now. Paid it all the way down to about it was $800 billion when Ronald Reagan came into office in 1981. $800 billion. Nothing. It was paid off because we built infrastructure. And of course, Eisenhower didn't just build the freeway system. He built new schools. I went to one of them starting in 1957. He built hospitals, or funded the building of hospitals. So that's the physical infrastructure, but there's also the human infrastructure. And again, this is not welfare. When you give everybody in the country a good education, and we know this, it's why we have public schools. You give everybody a good education, it helps society. You've got an educated and functional society. Well, nowadays, for most jobs that pay decently, you have to have a college degree. Why shouldn't that be considered part of our public education system? Why should we be the only developed country in the world that doesn't offer free college or very, very cheap college? Why? Just so some banks can make money on $1.5 trillion worth of student loans? Really? That's the reason? Well, actually, that is the reason. And it's stupid. But Joe Manchin thinks if you give 2 years of community, we're not even talking about state colleges like MSU. We're talking about community college. Yeah, 2 years of community college. No, Joe Manchin says that creates an entitlement society. Bull! That's the core infrastructure of a nation. And what about keeping people healthy? That's the core infrastructure of a nation. If you don't have healthy people, you don't have a healthy workforce. So our human infrastructure is as important as our physical infrastructure. And, I get it why the billionaires are opposed to this. They don't want to pay for it with taxes. They want that extra tax money to go into their money bins. I get it. The morbidly rich, they don't have to use public transportation. They don't fly through our airports. They use private airports. They never go through security. They live in literally a completely, well, not literally, but metaphorically, a completely separate world from you and me. They don't need the stuff that makes a nation work. The 700 billionaires we have, and the tens of thousands of people who who are worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I get that. But a legislator like Joe Manchin should understand that that's just their point of view. Of course, it's also Joe Manchin's point of view. He was born rich and became a coal baron on his own. He and his daughter are multi-millionaires. So I guess they don't need this stuff either. But I think it's pretty important that somebody call this out and just say, we need a national energy infrastructure. We need a national educational infrastructure. We need a national healthcare infrastructure. These are the things that make a first world nation. And these so-called conservatives like Kyrsten Sinema, who doesn't want to pay for it by reversing just a part of Trump's tax cuts. And Joe Manchin, who thinks, it's going to cause everybody to be on welfare. Somebody needs to educate these people. I get it, we haven't been teaching civics in high school forever. Although Joe Manchin's older than I am, he had to have taken civics in high school. But I could see where maybe Kirsten Sinema never had a civics class. But if we want to compete in the 21st century, the United States, we're the only developed country in the world now that doesn't offer free health care and free college, and that isn't aggressively moving its energy infrastructure toward renewables, which is this is what the Build Back Better program is about. If we want to compete in the 21st century, we've got to get our act together and stop listening to these right-wing billionaires.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And their BS grassroots movements. From the Tea Party to QAnon to, the whole bunch of them. And welcome back. Richard in Ypsilanti, Michigan. Hey, Richard. How's Ypsilanti? What's up?
Tom, you pretty much stole my rant.
Oh, no. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's about what I was going to talk about, that entitlement society. I'm tired of Manchin Republicans talking about entitlements like it's a dirty word.
Yeah. Some
sort. We've been paying into that all our working lives.
Yeah.
And darn right we're entitled to that.
Yep.
And, I'd been rankling me ever since I heard him say it. And another thing, too, is I got news for him. We already have an entitlement society. It's called the rich and the ultra-rich.
Oh, Joe Manchin's making making millions of dollars off tax breaks for coal. He's not paying for the disposal of the coal slurry. He's not paying for the cases of cancer that are caused downriver by dumping their coal waste in the rivers in West Virginia. He's not paying for, remediating the mountaintops and dealing with the old abandoned gas wells and all the empty coal mines all around West Virginia, where the companies just said, we're supposed to clean it up, we're going to declare bankruptcy. No, he's not paying for any of that.
Yeah, I know.
It's just crazy. Richard, thank you. Spot on. I'm with you. Thank you. Chaz in Lakewood, Washington. Hey, Chaz, what's on your mind today?
Yoboseyo, Tom.
Okay, what language is that?
That's Korean. I haven't watched a single episode of Squid Game because I don't see any need in killing more Koreans than we already have. Look, Tom, I saw a radical statistic moments ago. Even if you earned a salary of $1 million a week from the day that Christ was born until now, you still wouldn't be as rich as someone like Jeff Bezos. Quick question before I continue, Tom. Yeah, is that crazy?
It is.
Real quick question before I continue, Tom. Is there an unlimited amount of money or limited, Tom?
There's it depends on how you define money, but if you're talking about dollars, there's certainly a limited number.
There you go. See, for Jeff to have so much more, many have to have so much less. I don't know why the cons would want a permanent underclass of Americans roaming the street, picking at their bones. There are soldiers who are eligible for Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP.
Right,
look,
food stamps.
If a person makes, right, thank you, and welfare. If a person makes $50,000 a year, then they only spend $35 for SNAP. Meanwhile, they are giving $4,000 for corporations that don't pay a cent in tax. Is Kentucky griping when they get $2.50 for every dollar they put in? Listen, if you want to stop Kentucky, quote unquote, welfare, start calling it affirmative action, Tom. Hashtag GOP on your hashtag GOP on your shoes.
Yeah. Or yeah. It is amazing, Chaz, and this whole red state welfare thing. I mean, I'm still waiting for somebody to introduce the End Red State Welfare bill, because it's a problem. I mean, we're all supporting the red states, and I just don't think it's right. I think they should carry their own weight, at least to a reasonable extent. And they should invest in their own states. Chaz, thank you for the call. It's nice to hear from you. We'll be back. It's 22 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Stick around. Anything Goes Friday. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. We have a new video over at ThomHartmann.com for supporters of our program that centers around this clip from 1978.
The energy crisis is real. It is worldwide. It is a clear and present danger to our nation. These are facts, and we simply must face them. What I have to say to you now about energy is simple and vitally important. Point one, I am tonight setting a clear goal for the energy policy of the United States. Beginning this moment, this nation will never use more foreign oil than we did in 1977. Never.
And he continues.
Moreover, I will soon submit legislation to Congress calling for the creation of this nation's first solar bank, which will help us achieve the crucial goal of 20% of our energy coming from solar power by the year 2000.
What could have been, huh? Check it out at ThomHartmann.com. And welcome back, Deborah in Denver. Hey, Deborah, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I just wanted to tell you that I think it's possible that Marjorie Taylor Greene could be the infamous Capitol riot pipe bomber lady. I did notify the FBI the night the FBI released the footage on CNN and MSN. I filled out an online form between 9 p.m. and 11 p.m.
Yeah,
Before you play the music on me, let me give you the evidence that you could pull up online. Remember when she was chasing after David Hogg, the teenager?
Right.
And when she is swinging her arm?
Right.
Listen to me. Look at the shape of her hips, her thighs, and then look at the footage of her height, weight, her hips, her thighs. And I think, and then when the person has their hand in a glove.
Yeah, no, Deborah, I get it. She's a slightly chubby woman, and there's a lot of speculation that the bomber, was also a slightly chubby woman, or a man who was shaped like that. But
the D.C. police could subpoena her phone records. I think it's possible. Yeah. I'm not saying she is. I'm not saying she's not. I'm saying please look at the footage.
Okay, well, it's Anything Goes Friday, Deborah. Conspiracy theories are okay as long as they're not too far out there. Deborah,
the advertisement, her advertisement, it really fits her.
Yeah, I'm not going to go there. Deborah, thank you. Jerry in San Francisco. Hey, Jerry, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, what's on my mind is I read an article in Mother Jones, August 26, 2021, by a guy named Matt Cohen, who wrote Life in a Town with Government-Approved Militia. And U.S. Representative Bob Good has a lot to do with getting these guys together, mayors and county people in Virginia. And what really caught my eye was that besides the regular mission of statement of these militias, like secure gun rights and go after anti-vaxxers and fight Black Lives Matter, that type of thing, one thing that they really are pushing in these two areas is change the association of militias for these guys who blow up federal buildings and so forth and make them more family-friendly. So they show up at parades, and they show up in parks and teach young people how to clean their guns.
That's what the brown shirts used to do.
Well, yeah,
they did public works. They would clean up places. They did good stuff in addition to terrorizing people.
Article, if you guys have a chance to read it, Mother Jones, August 26, 21, Matt Cohen.
Okay, I'll check it out. Jerry, thank you. Fascinating. We got brown shirts again. Joe Walsh is coming up. Stick around.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. It's 27 minutes past the hour. Oh, actually, we'll be back with Joe Walsh, and after I talk with him, it'll just be you and me for the rest of the day. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Hidden History of American Healthcare: Why Sickness Bankrupts You and Makes Others Insanely Rich by me. I wrote this book. This is from the introduction, the title, How a Single-Payer Healthcare Systems Help Stop COVID-19. Healthcare systems can be national security systems. Just ask anyone from Taiwan. From January 20th, 2020, the United States, or on January 20, 2020, the United States recorded its first known case of COVID-19 infection. The following day, Taiwan got their first one too. By the end of April, over 1 million Americans were infected with the virus. But Taiwan had recorded only 388 infections, and their last case of local transmission was on April 12th. A few had arrived on aircraft from other countries. All were contained by quarantine. As of this writing in September 2020, there hadn't been a single new case or a single death in Taiwan since April. The economy never shut down, and as of this writing, was projected to have grown nearly 2% in 2020. Business, restaurants, theaters, and sports events were all open. Life was back to normal, albeit a mask-wearing normal. And it was made possible by their national single-payer healthcare system and their citizens' willingness to do their bit for the collective good. Back in the 1980s, Taiwan was on the edge of moving toward a democracy after a military coup in the 1960s. And about 40% of Taiwanese families did not have health insurance. If somebody in a family got sick, the cost of care often wiped out that family, and demands for reform were loud across the nation. Yue Reinhardt was a German-born healthcare economist married to a Taiwanese woman, and he attended a conference on healthcare in Taipei in 1989. His presentation impressed representatives of the government in attendance, and while he was still in town for the conference, they asked him for his best suggestion for a national healthcare system. He and his wife went back to their hotel and discussed the issue in depth, finally deciding that a single-payer national system would be the most cost-effective, efficient, and comprehensive program possible. He shared his thoughts with the government representatives, and the next day he left Taiwan to go back to Princeton, where he was an economic professor. 6 months later, though, a representative of Taiwan's government called him to say that they were going to take up his suggestion and asked him to help craft their healthcare program. He enthusiastically agreed, and by 1995, Taiwan had instituted one of the world's best single-payer healthcare systems. Today, everybody in Taiwan is fully covered for doctor and hospital services. Everybody has a driver's license-like healthcare card, which accesses their entire medical history. They can book a doctor's appointment on any computer terminal in the country, and the entire cost of the system is a bit more than 6% of Taiwan's GDP. For comparison, in the United States, healthcare consumes 24% of our GDP. Because there is no insurance company intermediaries sucking profits off the system in Taiwan. When COVID-19 hit, Taiwan chose not to use the blunt force technique of shutting down their economy and locking people in. Instead, they took on the coronavirus with an aggressive nationwide test and contact trace program tied into the National Health Service database. Every infected person was identified and put into a comfortable quarantine, and every person he or she had come into contact with, even very marginal contacts, were also tested and their contacts traced. By April, just a bit more than 2 months after the first case surfaced, the country had the coronavirus isolated and completely under control. By quarantining inbound visitors to the nation island of 23 million, they were able, as of this writing, to keep it that way. Maintaining public health is one of the most important functions of any nation's healthcare system. Because America's is so fragmented, it's inconceivable that our nation could respond to an epidemic, a pandemic, or another public health disaster with the speed and elegance of Taiwan or any of the world's other nations with single-payer Medicare for all types of systems. It's like Stockholm Syndrome, a friend who's a psychotherapist said, describing the way that Americans have clung for more than 5 generations to a for-profit health insurance system, while the rest of the world figured out how to provide health care to all their citizens at a much lower price. People know it and have become familiar with it, she added. They just can't imagine anything else. It's probably the largest con job ever perpetrated on the American people, one that has cost trillions of dollars and millions of lives. It's been going on since the 1940s. If it were a scientific experiment, it would have been shut down by the ethics review panels generations ago. This experiment in providing health care via a for-profit insurance system has led to the deaths of more Americans than we lost in World War II. Every year, over 500,000 Americans go bankrupt, often losing everything they've worked their entire lives for because somebody in their family got sick. That's 500,000 families a year, every year, for the past few decades. And the coronavirus, of course, has only made things worse. Perhaps most galling, this massive ripoff is costing our entire nation and each of us individually a fortune. Insurance premiums right now make up 22% of all taxable payroll, well above what the cost of Medicare for all would be at around 14% when first put into place, dropping down to around 10% within a few years as previously uninsured people get their health needs up to date. As the health insurance, drug, and hospital parasites push their suckers deeper and deeper into our body politic, spending on health care by Americans went up 25% between 2000 and 2014. The book, The Hidden History of American Health Care by Thom Hartmann. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. 34 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. One of the few Republicans, or former Republicans in this case, whose podcasts I enjoy, is Joe Walsh. He's got one called White Flag with Joe Walsh. I believe there's like 3 of them out now. He can bring us up to date. It's over on Apple and other podcast providers. His Twitter handle, Walsh Freedom. He's a former member of the U.S. House of Representatives from Illinois, the 8th District, former presidential candidate, the author of F Silence, calling Trump out for the cultish, moronic, authoritarian con man he is, and now an independent. Joe, welcome to the program.
Hey, it's awful nice to be with you, my friend. Thank you.
Thank you. Back at you. So Donald Trump came out yesterday and said the insurrection took place on November 3rd, Election Day. January 6th was the protest. Now, you're calling this an act of war. You want to elaborate?
And maybe I got over my skis a little bit, but I don't think that, again, I'm no longer outraged by anything Trump does. I believe he's a dictator. I believe he's un-American. I believe he's a traitor. In my mind, that was a declaration of war. What did he do, Tom? He attacked our elections again. He said that a democratic election was the insurrection, and the insurrection was the protest. I found that statement to be an utter attack on this country, and it's pathetic that no Republican raises their voice.
Yeah, I'm with you. Let's talk about your former party. I'm really curious to get your perspective as a former Republican of exactly what the Republican Party is. And I'll very briefly give you my kind of narrative understanding of what's happened over the last 50 years. I've lived through it. And I would love to hear your take on my take, and we can also talk about the Democrats if you want, in the roughly 10 minutes we've got here. Back in, I grew up in the 1950s, and my dad was a Republican activist, and he, in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, I guess, by the time I was in my 20s. And the old Eisenhower Republican Party, and for that matter, the Nixon Republican Party, was committed to progress and change in America, but in a very slow and cautious way. That was kind of the definition of conservatism. All this radical stuff of, the women's movement and end the war immediately and all this kind of stuff. That was too much for my dad and for a lot of Republicans. But they weren't opposed to moving forward, and they certainly were generally opposed to oligarchy in the United States. Then, in 1976, the U.S. Supreme Court, in a decision called Buckley versus Vallejo, said, okay, from now on, if a billionaire wants to pour cash down the throat of a politician, that's no longer considered bribery or political corruption. That's now called free speech, and it's protected by the Constitution. 2 years later, in 1978, in a Supreme Court decision called First National Bank versus Bellotti, they said the same thing for corporations. And so what happened at that point in time, the Democratic Party was fat and happy with the unions. They were just, the unions were the major source of funding. Democratic Party was like, okay, so what? The Republicans, however, were in crisis. I mean, this is post-Nixon, right? I mean, there was talk about the Republican Party going away. And so as we went into the Reagan era, it looked to me, and I actually have documented this fairly well in a couple of books, the Republican Party basically said, okay, big corporations, okay, billionaires, we're here for sale, because now the Supreme Court has legalized it. And the Republican Party became essentially the party of the oligarchs and the big corporations. And it seems like it has just gotten worse and worse and worse. Citizens United, of course, doubled down on that in 2010. And then, after Reagan destroyed the labor unions in the 80s and 90s, and we went from a third of America being unionized to 9% when Bill Clinton became president, Clinton found himself in a crisis because the Democratic Party couldn't fund itself with the unions anymore. And so he started the whole third way movement. Hey, let's get in bed with the corporations just like the Republicans did, only we'll leave the dirty industries like, coal and oil and chemicals to the Republicans. We'll take the clean industries. We'll be in bed with the bankers and the insurance companies, the white collar stuff. That is fading out of the Democratic Party now as the neoliberal movement is being kind of pushed aside by the old-fashioned Democrats. Thank God. But the Republicans, it seems to me, are still fully in the pocket of the Koch billionaire network and giant industry. Am I, that's my oversimplification, right? My 50-year history in 2 minutes. Your thoughts, Joe Walsh?
So you and I could have a fascinating conversation on the role of money in politics and unions, and we'd probably disagree with each other on most of it. But I do appreciate what you said, and let me just add to it by saying this. The Republican Party basically consists of old white men and old white women, and America is becoming less white by the day. That's a good thing. The problem is the Republican Party base has never embraced it. So along came a demagogue like Donald Trump who tapped into that ugly nativist aspect of the base. Tom, I was a Tea Party guy in Congress. You probably disliked me back when I was in Congress. I've publicly apologized for a lot of what I did to rile up the base. And the party establishment over the years ignored the concerns that their base had. Instead of educating the base that diversity is a good thing and legal immigration is a good thing, the party ignored their base. So by the time I came around, and then by the time that Trump came around, man, the base was pissed off. And when Trump said, I'm going to build a wall and keep brown and black people out, he was theirs. And they clung to him, and now it is an authoritarian embracing, white nationalist embracing cult. It's a scary thing.
So, I get that, Joe, and I get that narrative, but it seems to me that you're dealing with at the level of effect rather than cause. When Reagan started destroying labor unions, he started destroying the American middle class. NPR had the headline, I think the headline of the year or the decade 5 years ago, that 50% of Americans are no longer in the middle class. When Reagan came into office, the middle class was about 68% of America. And today it's 47% of America. So, and this is the direct consequence of Reagan's economic policies, particularly his taxation policies. It's also the direct result of the policies that Bill Clinton continued from Reagan. Let's keep in mind, Reagan and Bush negotiated the GATT, which led to the World Trade Organization that Bill Clinton helped bring into being, and they negotiated NAFTA. That's why it was a big deal in the '92 campaign, was because it was the George W. Bush administration had negotiated it, Clinton signed it. And so as a result, we lost 60,000 factories, tens of millions of good jobs, and all the jobs in the communities that surrounded them. All that stuff went overseas. And people are seriously pissed off about that. And so the Democratic response to that has been fairly consistently, Sherrod Brown has been singing this song, Bernie Sanders, forever. We need to stop offshoring jobs. We need to end this whole neoliberal experiment. It's been a disaster. Bring those jobs back home. We can't even build a damn cruise missile now without chips from China, and we're preparing to go to war with them? Really? So we've got this economic crisis, but the Republican Party's response to that, and Donald Trump's amplifying that, was, it's not that, our corporations that fund us have moved all our manufacturing overseas. The problem is that those black people want your jobs and those brown people want your jobs. And so you need to get hysterical about them. And I would say that's effect, not cause.
But vis-a-vis the Republican Party, the weird thing is Trump echoed a lot of what you said.
Oh, I know.
It was all a con. It was all a feint. He was lying when Trump said, "I'm going to bring all those jobs back. I'm going to bring coal back. I'm going to bring all the industries back." It was all BS. But he was able to grab on to a lot of the working class vote simply by fooling them. I can't stand Trump, and I think the Republican Party is dying, but the Republican Party continues to get a greater share of the working class vote, not just the working class white vote, and Democrats need to really open their eyes to that.
Oh, I agree with you. And like I said, I think the Democratic Party is in the process of flushing this whole neoliberal thing out, and that's a good thing, step by step. But it seems, I've been running a contest on this show for 18 years. Anybody who can name a single piece of legislation that was authored by Republicans, passed through with a Republican majority in the House and Senate, was signed into law by a Republican president, in my lifetime, since 1951, that principally benefits the average working people, the average working person, or certainly since the Reagan Revolution. Let's just time it at the Reagan Revolution, 1981.
Well, you and I, my friend,
I will give him an award.
But
nobody's ever won, Joe.
I
can name hundreds of pieces of Democratic legislation that meet that criteria. I can't name one piece of Republican legislation while you were in Congress, before you were in Congress, or since you've been in Congress. Isn't that the real problem?
No, I appreciate the question, but you and I are probably coming at it from a different place. I believe that free trade policies benefit middle-class America. And I always have believed that.
Because we get lousy jobs, but now we get cheap junk?
No, we are forced to compete, and we get, it's better for every American consumer. We get better priced goods. The problem is when politicians like Trump and others say that we can shut off the rest of the world and we're only going to buy American and we'll build a wall around America and protect all these jobs, that's all a bunch of BS. We live in a world now, in a free trade world now, and you can't lock up America and tell people anymore we're going to buy American. That just doesn't work.
In 1791, George Washington asked Alexander Hamilton, his Treasury Secretary, to come up with a plan to build, to turn America into an industrial powerhouse. He proposed that in 1793, and Congress adopted it. Hamilton's 11-point plan for manufacturers. You can look it up.
Yeah.
And point number one was, tariffs on imported goods that are not, on imported finished goods, export tariffs on raw materials, subsidies for growing essential industries. That stood until 1984. We had an industrial policy in the United States until the middle of the Reagan administration. In 1984 or 1983, Sam Walton's slogan at Walmart was 100% made in America. What you're saying is impossible, right, Joe, is what was normal in America for 200 years.
Well, fair point, and we were founded with the ability to enact tariffs, but we were not founded with a federal income tax, which came along afterwards. I'm just saying it's a much different world now, and it's been a different world for 40 years.
And it's killing our middle class.
Well, but again, Tom, that if we don't compete, it will. I just don't believe the answer is to not even engage in competition.
How does a company in Lansing, Michigan,
build a wall around America?
I'm not talking about building a wall around America. How does a company in Michigan compete with a company in China that's subsidized by the Chinese government?
I love you, my friend, but you are trying to build a wall, not Trump's stupid wall at the border, but you want to build like a protectionist wall.
I do.
And the genie's out of that bottle. That's never
I don't think
back.
so. I think that is why, I lived and worked in China back in the 80s, and it was a very poor country. Now, they've got bullet trains. They've got our jobs, our consumption has built China. How's that a good thing?
But also, China has built China. China can print whatever money they want to print, and they can spend whatever they want to spend. And that doesn't matter. They can build entire cities and then knock them down. That's what they do.
Yeah, Joe, you want to continue this conversation? You want to wrap this up, and we can live to fight another day.
Well, let's live to fight another day, because I'd love to continue this another time, Tom.
Okay.
It's good stuff.
All righty. Joe Walsh. His podcast is called White Flag with Joe Walsh. You can find it wherever fine podcasts are available. His book, F Silence. Joe, thanks a lot for dropping by.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Walsh Freedom, by the way, is his Twitter handle. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Paul in Lucerne, California. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, I'd like to talk about your last guest, but I'm not going to waste my breath. I don't agree with anything he has to say. He's a typical Republican.
Yeah, but at least he's willing to have a reasonable conversation.
Yes.
God bless him.
Good.
God bless him.
And he talks to you, and he I like that. I think that's awesome. That was the only beneficial thing about him today. I'm sorry. I'd like to talk about Joe Manchin and entitlement.
Sure, go for it.
Joe Manchin has a state that is an entitlement state. It's a taker state. It never pays its own way. It constantly lives off blue state welfare. So entitlements are good enough for your states, but it's not good enough for the taxpayers. And 40% of America is not middle class. What is your definition of middle class? My definition of middle class, this is what I learned in 1977 home economics class, okay? To make it into the middle class, you must have enough savings to be able to live for an entire year without changing your lifestyle. That's when you made it into the middle class. Who do you know in the middle class? Who? I know a few people.
Yeah.
I know lots of people that make $85 an hour, but if they lose their job for more than a month, they're done.
Yeah. No, I get all that.
So
and
I'm sorry, not 40% of the middle class. We have 40% of a new thing called the working middle class. As long as you keep your job, you can keep your lifestyle. But as soon as you lose your job, you lose your lifestyle. That's not the middle class.
Yeah, if you look at that article that I published Tuesday over at HartmannReport.com that about the middle class and how countries have to choose whether or not they're going to have a middle class, there's a link in there to that NPR story that indicated that fewer than half of Americans are now in the middle class. And the criteria that they used is the criteria that economists have used for decades, which is actually a numerical income range. And I think it ran from something like 35,000 up to 110,000 or something like that. It was a fairly broad range of money. And that was the American middle class. And they defined it as the middle class because it was kind of the median point, excluding the very top of the 1%. It was the median point between, the poor and the wealthy. And,
but they don't.
Go ahead.
There's no factor in savings. I mean, to be successful, you have to have a nest egg.
It helps. It helps, to be able to be caught, to catch yourself when you fall. Yeah, I get it. Paul, thanks for the call. Larry in Los Angeles. Hey, Larry, what's up?
Hi. I wish when you have those Republicans on the air, you would ask them if their policies work so well, why is it that every Republican president for the last 124 years has crashed our economy?
Great question.
Right up, and that resulted in right up to 2016, where all of the points in the markets from every index was put there when a Democrat was in the White House. So if their policies are so good, and if Manchin, I don't understand that guy except that I know he's a Republican. He's just calling himself a Democrat because he all of his arguments sound like the arguments of a Republican. He trashed Biden for Afghanistan, and he basically ignored what Donald Trump did when he got the Taliban leadership out of prison so that he could negotiate with deplorables and then put 5,000 additional troops on the battlefield for the Taliban.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And he basically paid off the Taliban, said, stop shooting at us so I'll look good. and I'll give you the whole country. And I don't want anything in exchange for it. You don't even have to stop being terrorists. You know, it was crazy. You're right, Larry. Larry, thank you very much. Very, very, very well done. We'll be back. It's a bit of 52 minutes past the hour. Stick around. Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. So we have a new video op-ed over at thomhartmann.com. So have you ever heard of molnupiravir? It's a new drug that actually looks like it reduces the probability that you will end up hospitalized or dead from COVID-19. It's a 5-day course. You take a pill every day for 5 days. It costs Merck, the company that is selling it, $17.74 to make that 5-day, 5 pills. And they are selling it to you and me, to the federal government, for $712 per 5 pills, per, treatment course. And you say, what? And here's where it gets really interesting. The Defense Threat Reduction Agency, which is part of the Department of Defense, provided $10 million of funding to Emory University to develop this drug, and $19 million in additional grants came from the National Institutes of Health. We paid to develop this drug, and now we're going to pay $700 for it? Really? Check it out. There's a video over at thomhartmann.com all about it. And welcome back. Anything Goes Friday. Russ in Hickory Hills, Illinois. Hey, Russ, what's on your mind today?
As usual, Tom, but, I called the lady. Is this the end of the Republican moderates, as I call them, the Democrats? Because last Sunday, Tom, here we go again, a moderate. We were supposed to, defund this and that. She goes, oh, no. They're entitled to make all their money. I call them, all they are is blue dog Republicans, Tom, because if you want to talk about Ronald Reagan, who helped Ronald Reagan? Tip O'Neill. And who was his understudy? Chris Matthews, who couldn't get enough Republicans on his show. Am I right or wrong? Is this the end of the moderate Republicans? Are they going to start fading out of our party?
Oh, I think
they got nothing for us.
I think moderate Republicans were pushed out of the Republican Party in 2016 with the election of Donald Trump.
The moderate Democrats now.
Oh, the so-called moderate.
They're better than the moderate Republicans. Look at the 3 in New York, Portland, in California, Tom.
Yeah.
They could have stopped the drug prices. They kissed the rear end of the other part. No,
I totally get it, Russ. And what I'm seeing here is that the window, the so-called Overton window, has shifted dramatically in the last 5 years. And I think a lot of it is in part because Donald Trump kind of started this process. He took Bernie Sanders' rhetoric and Sherrod Brown's rhetoric about, hey, free trade isn't working, neoliberalism isn't working, deregulation isn't working, and no taxes on rich people isn't working, and we're going to raise taxes on rich people, and we're going to bring jobs back to America. And, of course, he was lying through his teeth. But now you've got Democrats who are actually saying that and trying to do that. And also, let's get money out of politics. And Democrats trying to do that. And as best I can tell, the Democrats who are trying to imitate the Republicans who are in the bag with the big corporations, they're starting to lose their mojo. They're starting to lose their power. They're losing their positions. They're being primaried by, look at Joe Crowley losing his position, his seat in New York to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. It's a classic example. The old blue dogs, the third way, the New Democrats, Bill Clinton's New Democrats, they're all being pushed out by progressives. And I see that as a really, really good sign. I think this is a normal evolutionary process for political parties.
Let me ask you something. You got one in Portland. Is Portland, New York, and California? Do you think they'll primary? They're in the heart of the city. You're not going to lose the seat. Do you think you're going to primary them?
I don't know. I just don't know, Russ. Time will tell. But thanks a lot for the call. Thanks a lot for the call. We'll be back. We're hitting the top of the hour here. I'll pick up your phone calls. Like I said, it's Anything Goes Friday. Just you and me for the next 2 hours. So stick around. We're going to have some good times.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery, CBD for sleep and pain relief. More info is available at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Ground News, a well-rounded perspective for newsreaders. More info at ground.news/Tom. Angie, for any project on your to-do list. More info at Angie.com. Dinovite, a whole food supplement for your pet's immune system. More info at Dinovite.com. And ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom.
Today's book in our book club is The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, by this guy, Thom Hartmann. This is from chapter 1, or from the introduction, actually. In 2016, 6% of Americans who were eligible to vote nominated Donald Trump as the GOP's presidential candidate. It was 8% for Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side. Trump went on to be elected president by 26% of eligible voters. The modern American oligarchs have largely stayed in power using 3 simple elements: explicit and overt racism, massive disinformation campaigns, and voter suppression. No ideas, no push for better schools, hospitals, airports, roads, or bridges, or reform of our health, energy, or financial systems. No promise of more and better jobs. None of these staples of past presidential campaigns can be found in pretty much any Republican advertising today. Instead, the public Republican message is all about race, or the subset of race, religion. Muslim stands in for brown Arab in GOP speak, and immigration, aka brown people from south of our border, and socialism. Meanwhile, Republican secretaries of state across the nation are vigorously purging voters from the rolls. Over 17 million, more than 10% of America's active voters, in just the 2016-2018 period, according to NBC News. After the After the 5 Republican appointees on the U.S. Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act in 2013, 14 GOP-controlled states moved within a year, some within days, to restrict access to the vote, particularly for communities of color, students, and retired people. In North Carolina, for example, 158 polling places were permanently closed in the 40 counties with the most African-American voters just before the 2016 election, leading to a 16% decline in African-American early voting in that state. An MIT study found that nationwide, Hispanic voters wait 150% longer in line than white voters, and black voters can expect to wait 200% longer in line to vote. In Indiana, then Governor Mike Pence's new rigorous voter ID law caused an 11.5% drop in African-American voting. Students are suing for their right to vote, and retired people who no longer drive but care passionately about their Social Security and Medicare are being turned away at the polls by the hundreds of thousands because their driver's licenses have expired. The obvious failure of 40-plus years of Reaganomics and GOP policies to maintain a functional middle class in America has been a problem for the modern GOP. In 1974, for example, the GOP had outright control of only 7 states. The message, elect us and we'll help the rich people, just didn't generally resonate with American voters. It's the reason why, outside of the fluke elections of 46 and 52, Democrats controlled the House of Representatives outright for 3 generations, from 1933 to 1996, and controlled the Senate for most of that time. Desperate to win the presidency for the GOP in 1968, Richard Nixon went so far as to commit treason by torpedoing a peace deal with President Lyndon Johnson that President Lyndon Johnson had worked out with the North and South Vietnamese. According to Abul Hassan Bani Sadr, then president of Iran, Ronald Reagan did the same thing by cutting a deal with Iran whereby they would hold on to the U.S. embassy hostages until after the 1980 presidential election, torpedoing Jimmy Carter's chances of re-election. But in 2000, the GOP changed tactics. After Reagan was almost busted for his part in Iran-Contra, he testified that he had forgotten about details of the program more than 80 times. His growing Alzheimer's spared him an indictment. They realized that getting busted for treason wasn't worth the risk. They needed a plan B, and it was deliciously simple. If most voters don't like what you're selling, then just don't let them vote. Paul Weyrich promoted this idea back in 1980 when he was campaigning for Reagan after co-founding the Heritage Foundation. And indeed, many Republican luminaries, such as William Rehnquist, who went from serving the GOP by standing in polling places and intimidating Hispanic and Native American voters in the 1960s, to becoming Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, rose up through the ranks by participating in Republican-run voter intimidation schemes. Voter suppression became the foundational go-to tactic for the GOP in 2000. Although the GOP attacked Democratic presidential nominee Al Gore with smear and innuendo, ridiculing him for helping write the legislation that created the modern internet, for example, the main thing that got George W. Bush into the White House was voter suppression. His brother, Florida Governor Jeb Bush, and Bush's Secretary of State, Katherine Harris, threw somewhere between 20,000 and 90,000 African-American voters off the rolls. They were able to get the vote close enough. The 5 Republican appointees to the Supreme Court functionally awarded Bush the presidency. The BBC covered this in 2001 in 2 major investigative reports that were seen all over the world, except on any American media. By 2016, the Republican Party had fine-tuned its voter suppression and intimidation systems to the point that they ran like well-oiled machines in nearly 30 states. Between the 2012 and 2016 presidential elections, for example, Ohio had purged more than 2 million voters from its rolls, the vast majority, more than 2-to-1, in heavily African-American and Hispanic counties. The 5 Republican appointees on the Supreme Court ruled in 2017 that they could keep it up. And other states have since adopted their new tactic of caging voters. The book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, by me.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Wanted to tell you about something called energy cannibalism. This is absolutely fascinating. I was flagged about this by a post over on Daily Kos by Pacololo in the community threads, where I occasionally post as well. And it's titled, Energy Cannibalism is Happening So Fast That the Collapse of the Oil Industry Will Blow Up Renewables, will derail renewables. And here's what it is and how it works. When you pump oil out of the ground, there's a whole spectrum of amounts of effort it takes to get that oil. Most of us of a certain age remember the movies back, you know, and film clips and things from back in the first half of the 20th century, when people would go out to Oklahoma or Texas and they'd drill a water well thinking they would find water, and they'd hit a certain depth and suddenly oil would come gushing out of the ground. They were called geysers or gushers or whatever. And people got rich from that. I mean, you know, I believe there's a clip of one of those in the B-roll that starts the Beverly Hillbillies, you know. So they moved to Beverly Hills with all that oil money. So that requires virtually no energy at all to get the oil out of the ground when it's just bubbling out of the ground. And the cost of producing that oil is referred to as cost of production. For example, as Dick Cheney pointed out in the months before we invaded Iraq, Iraq had some of the lowest production cost oil in the world because they had all these virgin oil fields that were untapped. And so you could produce oil in Iraq for $3 a barrel, $5 a barrel, at the most $10 a barrel. Typically, it was under $5 a barrel. Yeah, I covered this in considerable detail about 10 years ago in a program about this. On the other hand, over at Saudi Arabia, they've been sucking on that strong long enough that now they've got to run actual electrical machines to pump the oil out. And that electricity requires energy produced by burning oil. And so, 10, 15, in some cases 20% of the oil that is brought out of the ground has to be burned to get that oil. Right now, worldwide, according to the research cited in this diary over at Daily Kos, 15.5% of all the energy that is produced is used to get that energy. So you get 100 barrels of oil, it takes you 15 and a half barrels to get it, you're left over with roughly 85 barrels of oil. But that number, that percentage, that 15% is going up. And it's going up rapidly. It's far more energy intensive to pull oil out of the Arctic, for example, or pull it off an offshore rig and transport it on to, up to the shore. And then transport it via these long pipelines to refineries. So, we're starting to hit the point. In fact, they're suggesting that by 2024, which is, if I'm doing my math right, 3 years from now, the amount of energy that we use to just produce oil is going to be 25% of all the oil produced. So right now it's 15%. Within 3 or 4 years, it's going to be 25%. And by 2050, half of all the energy used is going to be required to pull that oil out of the ground. Now, this means a couple of things. Number one, it means that oil is going to start getting much more expensive. And you're seeing that literally right now in the price of oil and the price of gasoline. And that will drive inflation. And this is one of the big inflationary pressures that literally nobody is talking about. And in some ways, you could argue that that's a good thing for green energy because the more expensive oil becomes, the more attractive green energy becomes. I drive my car on 100% electricity for a fraction of what it would cost if I was burning gasoline right now. Now, that wouldn't have been the case a couple of years ago when gas was super cheap. But right now, it's a hell of a lot cheaper to buy electricity, plug my car just into my house at, I think it's around 7 cents a kilowatt hour to charge my car that way rather than put gas in it. Well, that's going to get even more, as the price of gas goes up. And I saw a headline on Drudge yesterday that there was a city in California where gas was $5 a gallon. It's going to go higher. If these numbers on worldwide energy production, now this isn't entirely the United States, but that in just the next 5 years, you're going to see the cost of energy production going from 15% of energy to 25% of energy. You're going to see the cost of gasoline go to $10 a gallon in the next 3 years. And that's going to drive electrification of our transportation systems really efficiently. And I think that's a good thing, broadly speaking. Although, as I said, it's going to produce inflation. And then you're going to get so-called conservative politicians just being hysterical about inflation. Oh, my God, inflation. Are you kidding? Can't have that. It's all caused by government spending, don't you know? We need to cut Social Security to stop inflation. They're already trotting this out, right? I haven't heard Joe Manchin say this yet, but it wouldn't surprise me if this is the next thing he says. Oh, if we give eyeglasses to seniors, that's going to cause inflation. We give free college to students, that's going to cause inflation. Government shouldn't be spending money, it causes inflation. No, government spending money does not cause inflation. There are only two things that cause inflation. Number one, government diluting the value of money like Nixon did in 71 and 72, when he devalued the dollar against all the other major currencies of the world first by 10% and then by 11% those 2 years. That causes inflation. And we're not doing that right now. And the other thing that causes inflation is a shortage of essential goods. And we're seeing a shortage of goods right now, broadly speaking, because the economy's bouncing back. Everybody's all hysterical about, oh my God, do your Christmas shopping now. We're running out of stuff in our stores. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. It's getting more expensive to build houses. There's no building materials. That's a good thing. I mean, it's not, essentially a good thing that it's harder to buy some things. But that's a sign that the economy is recovering. Now, it's also a sign that the economy is recovering in a way that's more heavily skewed towards goods than towards services, which is a change in how our economy works from the last 100 years. Because people are not spending as much money going to restaurants because they're afraid of getting COVID. They're not spending as much money going to the theater because they're afraid of getting COVID. They're not spending as much money going to sporting events or just shopping in the mall because they're afraid of getting COVID. And instead, they're taking that same money and they're using it to buy things, mostly online. It's why Jeff Bezos has enough money to shoot himself into outer space. But it means that we're demanding more goods than we typically do. Because people are finding, hey, I got $1,000 left over this year that I would have spent going to restaurants. I think I'll buy a new gym for my basement, or I'll replace my color TV, or have elaborate Christmas gifts. So this is what's going on. But so that inflation has nothing to do with anything that any politician is going to control, frankly. But this increase in the difficulty of extracting oil, and therefore the increased cost of oil, will, and that inflation from the lack of goods will probably wash out of the economy. There will be a permanent reduction in the value of the dollar. We're not going to see prices ever go down again. That doesn't happen. You don't want that to happen. That's called a depression, when prices go down, or a severe recession. So, prices are hitting new highs, and that's why workers are striking and saying, hey, wait a minute, our wages need to hit new highs too. But this increase in the price of oil, keep an eye on this, because this is going to have really significant political effects, really significant geographical, what would you call it, geopolitical effects, the relationships between countries. It's going to increase the power of countries that are oil rich, like Russia and Saudi Arabia. It's going to decrease the power of countries that are oil poor, not just oil, natural gas and coal as well, like much of Europe. I think we're going to see some fundamental realignments here coming up.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And this is all part of this shaking out process as we head into what hopefully will be a coal-free, oil-free, carbon-free future. And welcome back. Let's see here. Dennis in Bergenfield, New Jersey. Hey, Dennis, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching us on YouTube.
Thank you, Tom. I'd like to ask about a minimum wage increase in 2007. I did read a report that said that it did keep about a million people, or 0.7% of the employed workforce, from joining jobs at $5.15 an hour. But, I guess my question is, obviously, in today's economy, who can survive on $5.15 an hour? Nobody can. Is it worth it? Are these jobs that we really want in the economy? $5.15 an hour? Right. Is it okay that we're losing them?
The essential statement that we the people make when, through our government, we establish a minimum wage is that the rules of the game of business, the rule book, like the NFL, rule book, the rule book should be written to say there are some ways that you can run your business that we don't consider acceptable in our society. Paying people $3 an hour, we don't consider that acceptable in our society. If that's the only way you can run your business, if your business can only succeed, if you pay people $4 an hour, you go broke, then you've got a bad business model. Give it up, start something else. And right now it's set at $7.25 an hour federally, although a lot of states, here in Oregon it's heading toward $15 an hour. In Washington State, they're very close to that. all across the country, states are raising their minimum wages. But it's really just a statement of what's an acceptable business practice in society.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I don't think these jobs that are even $7.25 today.
They're going to go away. Those employers are either going to have to shut down their businesses, or they're going to have to recalibrate their business model and say, well, gee, maybe the CEO won't make $35 million a year anymore. Maybe he'll only make $10 million a year, and the workers are going to start making $10 an hour or $15 an hour or whatever. I mean, they're just going to have to recalibrate their business. So it's pretty.
And they always
go ahead.
Go ahead. Yeah, they always say, the high school diploma people, they're going to lose those jobs. But these are poverty wage jobs. So should we? I don't think we should really be concerned.
No, we shouldn't. We shouldn't. And the market will correct itself. It really will. I mean, I'm not a neoliberal, but there is some truth to that. Dennis, thank you very much for the call. John in Santa Cruz. Hey, John, what's up?
Oh, hi, Tom. A question I want to ask is Medicare Advantage program.
Mm-hmm.
I am confused. Why are good people, famous people like Joe Namath and William Shatner, and there's probably a few others, pushing it? Don't they have any empathy? Why are they getting hired to do that?
I'm guessing, they don't understand what the real deal is. They've been told, it's a wonderful plan, don't worry. And B, they're paid millions of dollars.
Oh, just to go on there and do that, they'll pay them a lot of money?
Millions. Absolutely. Those are acting jobs. Those people don't, Joe Namath and William Shatner and Jimmy, what's his name, from Good Times, they're not promoting Medicare because they love it or they believe in it. They are promoting Medicare because they are paid literally millions, if not tens of millions of dollars to do so. They are getting rich, along with the insurance companies.
Oh, and they don't care about that it's destroying the society. They don't care.
Whether they care or not, I don't know. I don't know either of those people. And so I'm not able to ask them, and I'm not going to pretend to know what's going on inside their lives. But I do know that commercials are very lucrative, and good actors in commercials are paid millions and millions of dollars. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. Hey, we've got a new video up over at ThomHartmann.com about big mail-in. You heard about this? Now, I'm not talking about the George Bernard Shaw play that got made into the movie My Fair Lady and all that kind of stuff. No, this is a PR firm in France. And, when you hear from Americans that, we could never put Donald Trump in jail because only third world countries do that. France is not only not a third world country, they're our oldest ally. And they just convicted their former president for the second time of fraud and corruption around the way he was running his campaigns. Nicolas Sarkozy. They just convicted him a second time. Now, he's appealing both of them. He's, walking around with an ankle bracelet. But, I've got all the details on this video over at ThomHartmann.com. You can check it out. But, again, next time somebody says, we can't put Trump in jail, tell them, hey, France did. It is Anything Goes Friday, picking up your calls. And Norma in Montgomery, Alabama. Excuse me. Hey, Norma, what's up?
Oh, a lot, Tom.
Pick one.
Yeah. Okay, first, Manchin needs to understand that even if he should lose his coal subsidies, he, is still going to be rich.
Yeah.
That's why he doesn't want any money out of the budget going anywhere else. But anyway, I got a question that I can't answer. Somebody wants to know if this new voting rights bill has a clause in it that states that all of this so-called money that people have been getting under, Buckley and what's the one in the middle? I can't remember the one of the banks.
Yeah,
but
First National Bank versus Bellotti. Frank Bellotti was the Attorney General or Secretary of State, Attorney General for Massachusetts. He brought the prosecution.
Yeah. Okay. Well, supposedly there is a clause in there that if this voting right bill passes, that anyone who receives money from a corporation or a PAC or anything like that, it must become public and easily accessible.
Right.
And this is the main reason they're fighting against the voting rights bill?
Could be.
Is that correct?
I'm sure it's not making them happy. Could be. I think from the Republicans' point of view, they're unanimously fighting against it because, they just, it will outlaw a lot of the legislation that they've already passed. It'll change the way that states get gerrymandered. That's why they're running so fast to gerrymander their states, just in case the Democrats blow up the filibuster and pass this thing. So it'll be a fiat accompli. And that's what's going on. And from the Democratic point of view, as I mentioned earlier, the Overton window is shifting, for acceptable political dialogue. And what's happening is increasingly Democrats who are successful at the polls are those Democrats who can go on TV and say, I don't take corporate PAC money. And, I'm funded by my voters. And so they would be enthusiastically in favor of any legislation that would point out that, there are still a few, like Kurt Schrader here in Oregon, there's still a few bought-off Democrats who are, greedily sucking down money from big pharma or from big oil or whatever it may be, and this legislation would out them. I am surprised, that all 50 Democrats in the Senate are willing to go along with this. But it's easy to take a moral position when there's no possibility of it passing.
That's true.
And causing it to pass would mean ending the filibuster. And all of a sudden, you talk about ending the filibuster, and those senators who are taking huge quantities of money from outside interests, like Manchin and Sinema, and apparently Chris Coons as well, start saying, "Oh, wait a minute." So talk is cheap, Norma.
Yes, I'm going to violate a rule. I got a letter from the power company. They're going to send me a $50 gift card if I will let them install a Wi-Fi thermostat in my house so they can help me keep my bill down.
And are you going to do it?
Of course not. I'm not going to let someone else control my HVAC, particularly when they said that they're going to fix it so that I wouldn't be paying high rates for peak times.
Yeah. Now,
and so as this goes across the country, are they going to tell you when you can charge your car?
Well, actually the way that it works here in Oregon is you can buy either a regular electric plan where it's the same price 24/7, or you can buy an electric plan where at night the price goes down 2 or 3 cents a kilowatt hour, and during the day it goes up 2 or 3 cents a kilowatt hour. And that's ideal for people who charge their cars overnight, for example. But I actually did that with my thermostat. I got $25 back from my utility, and I watched it very carefully last year. And what I saw was that during that 3 days when it was 116 degrees here, it would periodically, like once an hour during that period of time, it would shut off for maybe 10 minutes. And I'm guessing that, the next door neighbor got shut off 10 minutes after me, and then the next door. So, they're doing load balancing. I don't think that's a bad thing, Norma.
Yeah, but not here in Alabama. We have a total of 5 million people, of which almost 1 out of 5 has COVID so far. Oy. But here we have very rural areas, and it's not necessary. Yeah. And I'm getting complaints from all my neighbors. What are you going to do? I said, I don't know yet. But I never keep my thermostat more than 10 degrees difference in the outside air because I'm in and out so much. I do not want to suffer a great shock and change of temperatures.
Wow, you and my wife. It's like.
If it's 100 degrees out there, it's going to be 85 in here.
Yeah.
That's the way it is.
Yeah.
And if it's like 40 out there, it will probably be 60 in here. Yeah. But I'm not going to make that. I'm not going to keep mine 71 year round.
Yeah. No, I get it. And there's a lot of wisdom to that. I mean, that was what Jimmy Carter was pitching to us back in the day. Wear a sweater. Norma, thank you. Thank you very much for the call. It's always nice talking to you. It's 27 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls on Anything Goes Friday right after this. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, the place where we dare to ask, is Amazon a person? No, wait a minute. No, it's a corporation. No, they shouldn't have human rights.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with your calls in just a moment. Today's book in our book club is The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, by this guy, Thom Hartmann. This is from chapter 1, or from the introduction, actually. In 2016, 6% of Americans who were eligible to vote nominated Donald Trump as the GOP's presidential candidate. It was 8% for Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side. Trump went on to be elected president by 26% of eligible voters. The modern American oligarchs have largely stayed in power using three simple elements: explicit and overt racism, massive disinformation campaigns, and voter suppression. No ideas, no push for better schools, hospitals, airports, roads, or bridges, or reform of our health, energy, or financial systems. No promise of more and better jobs. None of these staples of past presidential campaigns can be found in pretty much any Republican advertising today. Instead, the public Republican message is all about race, or the subset of race, religion. Muslim stands in for brown Arab in GOP speak, and immigration, aka brown people from south of our border, and socialism. Meanwhile, Republican secretaries of state across the nation are vigorously purging voters from the rolls. Over 17 million, more than 10% of America's active voters, in just the 2016-2018 period, according to NBC News. After the 5 Republican appointees on the U.S. Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act in 2013, 14 GOP-controlled states moved within a year, some within days, to restrict access to the vote, particularly for communities of color, students, and retired people. In North Carolina, for example, 158 polling places were permanently closed in the 40 counties with the most African-American voters just before the 2016 election, leading to a 16% decline in African-American early voting in that state. An MIT study found that nationwide, Hispanic voters wait 150% longer in line than white voters, and black voters can expect to wait 200% longer in line to vote. In Indiana, then Governor Mike Pence's new rigorous voter ID law caused an 11.5% drop in African-American voting. Students are suing for their right to vote, and retired people who no longer drive but care passionately about their Social Security and Medicare are being turned away at the polls by the hundreds of thousands because their driver's licenses have expired. The obvious failure of 40-plus years of Reaganomics and GOP policies to maintain a functional middle class in America has been a problem for the modern GOP. In 1974, for example, the GOP had outright control of only 7 states. The message, elect us and we'll help the rich people, just didn't generally resonate with American voters. It's the reason why, outside of the fluke elections of 46 and 52, Democrats controlled the House of Representatives outright for 3 generations, from 1933 to 1996, and controlled the Senate for most of that time. Desperate to win the presidency for the GOP in 1968, Richard Nixon went so far as to commit treason by torpedoing a peace deal with President Lyndon Johnson that President Lyndon Johnson had worked out with the North and South Vietnamese. According to Abul Hassan Bani Sadr, then president of Iran, Ronald Reagan did the same thing by cutting a deal with Iran whereby they would hold on to the U.S. embassy hostages until after the 1980 presidential election, torpedoing Jimmy Carter's chances of re-election. But in 2000, the GOP changed tactics. After Reagan was almost busted for his part in Iran-Contra, he testified that he had forgotten about details of the program more than 80 times. His growing Alzheimer's spared him an indictment. They realized that getting busted for treason wasn't worth the risk. They needed a plan B, and it was deliciously simple. If most voters don't like what you're selling, then just don't let them vote. Paul Weyrich promoted this idea back in 1980 when he was campaigning for Reagan after co-founding the Heritage Foundation. And indeed, many Republican luminaries, such as William Rehnquist, who went from serving the GOP by standing in polling places and intimidating Hispanic and Native American voters in the 1960s, to becoming Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, rose up through the ranks by participating in Republican-run voter intimidation schemes. Voter suppression became the foundational go-to tactic for the GOP in 2000. Although the GOP attacked Democratic presidential nominee Al Gore with smear and innuendo, ridiculing him for helping write the legislation that created the modern internet, for example, the main thing that got George W. Bush into the White House was voter suppression. His brother, Florida Governor Jeb Bush, and Bush's Secretary of State, Katherine Harris, threw somewhere between 20,000 and 90,000 African-American voters off the rolls. They were able to get the vote close enough. The 5 Republican appointees to the Supreme Court functionally awarded Bush the presidency. The BBC covered this in 2001 in 2 major investigative reports that were seen all over the world, except on any American media. By 2016, the Republican Party had fine-tuned its voter suppression and intimidation systems to the point that they ran like well-oiled machines in nearly 30 states. Between the 2012 and 2016 presidential elections, for example, Ohio had purged more than 2 million voters from its rolls, the vast majority, more than 2 to 1, in heavily African-American and Hispanic counties. The 5 Republican appointees on the Supreme Court ruled in 2017 that they could keep it up. And other states have since adopted their new tactic of caging voters. The book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, by me. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. So we've got a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program about the 14th Amendment and the debt ceiling. And just kind of riddle me this one, Batman, right? The 14th Amendment reads, and I'm taking out the parts that specifically refer to pensions and bounties, for services suppressing the insurrection, because it came out of the Civil War. But the 14th Amendment reads, in part, the validity of the public debt of the United States shall not be questioned. In other words, Congress, you can't take actions that might cause the public debt not to be paid. You can't refuse to raise the debt ceiling, is how I read that. The debt ceiling, of course, didn't even exist when they wrote the 14th Amendment. That came along in 1917. But I think this is raising some really important questions, and I dig into it in this video over there. You can check it out. It's all over at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. Anything Goes Friday. And let's see. Try to see who's been on hold longest here, and my apologies for that. George in Chicago. Hey, George, what's on your mind today?
Well, we talked last week, Tom, about the ongoing conflict in Chicago between Mayor Lori Lightfoot and the Fraternal Order of Police.
Yeah, and I asked you to keep me up to date. What's going on?
Well, the serious shortage of police officers that was feared might occur over the weekend didn't happen. The city basically backed off a bit and slow-walked the sanctions it was going to impose.
This is around a vaccine mandate, right?
Not precisely. Right now, all that the city is asking, not just police officers, but all city employees to do, is to log on to a city portal and answer one of 2 questions. Are you vaccinated or are you not vaccinated? That's all that's going on right now. And, excuse me, by the end of last week, the police union had sued the mayor and the city to get a court order for them to stop. That's still pending. The city filed against John Catanzara, the head of the FOP, because he was making public statements and social media posts and other communications telling his membership to disobey the lawful orders of the city mayor. And the circuit court judge that heard the case put a gag order on Catanzara and said that he was not to make any statements in that regard, which he promptly disobeyed. He issued another statement which he thought was skating right up to the edge of where he wasn't supposed to go. But the city has asked that this order be reinforced, because not only has he not stopped making statements, other officers of the union have been making statements in his stead, and there have been email blasts and other things. Mm-hmm. But the situation as it is now is that what the city's been doing is bringing in non-compliant officers in groups each day this week and counseling them about what they're being asked to do and what the consequences are if they don't. So far, it seems like most of the cops who've been brought in have logged onto the portal and answered one of the two questions. Early in the week, they had relieved about 20 officers of their badges, IDs, and police powers because they wouldn't comply. I don't know what the number is today, but I'm pretty sure it's probably less than 100.
Yeah, Jay Inslee, by the way, just for context, in Washington State, just north of me, he had a mandate that was statewide for all the state employees. And there's tens of thousands of cops in Washington State who are, employees of the state. And he fired 232, as I recall. It was something like that. It was just a little over a couple hundred police for refusing to get vaccinated. And that was just a drop in the bucket, and they don't think it's going to affect public safety at all. And like I keep saying, you want to know who the right-wing crazies are who are believing this QAnon BS and therefore represent a threat to public safety? They're the ones who are refusing to get vaccinated. So fire them.
Yes. The police are making a mistake here if they think Lori Lightfoot's going to back off. She's a former prosecutor, and she's
one tough
stubborn
cookie
in her ways. The point she made in a press conference earlier this week that this was not sprung on anybody as a surprise. Beginning a few weeks ago, the city had talks with all 38 of the unions that represent city employees, including police and fire, and it was explained to all of them what was going to be required. And currently, most of these other unions are close to 100% compliance. 13 city departments are 100%. The only ones who are dragging down the city's average are police and fire. And what's also annoying at this time is next door red state Indiana politicians have been posting snarky notices that Chicago cops quit Chicago and come work here.
Yes.
We'll love you. And,
I saw the story on Drudge.
Yeah, and even the head of the Indiana State Police went public with that. And it's like for the head of one state police agency to interfere in the police department of another state is pretty heinous as far as I'm concerned.
I agree. Yeah.
The other thing I'd like to bring up is nationwide, latest statistics are that both last year and this year, more cops died from the COVID than from being shot.
Correct.
Currently, this year, the number of police died from COVID is something over 230. 1/4 of that number has been shot.
Right, and not just being shot, by the way. More cops have died from COVID than from all other causes combined.
Yeah, and the point that the mayor and her people are trying to make is, if you're a fully vaccinated police officer and you've got to spend 8 hours in a patrol car with a police officer who isn't, if he's carrying the virus, which is a pretty good bet, even though you're probably not going to get sick or die from it, you're going to bring it home, and if your kids are going to get it,
right.
Or maybe your father or mother or grandparent who is immunocompromised. So this is a public safety matter, and first responders should be conscious of the fact that we're all counting on them to protect us not only from people with guns and knives, but from people carrying the virus. And since they're in and out of houses and bars and fights and jails, they're coming in contact with all kinds of people. They could be picking it up 20 times a day.
Sure, and if they come to my house because I had a heart attack and they just happen to be the closest first responder, I don't want them breathing COVID all over me as they're trying to save my life.
Exactly. And the bottom line right now is that according to the police chief, Superintendent Brown, he believed that there's significant movement within the police force from the vaccine resistors. He believed that by the end of business Wednesday, 68% of those who had been brought in for counseling would comply, and he was reasonably optimistic that by close of business this coming Monday, 80% would have complied.
Yeah.
And again, this is only to go to a portal and say, yes, I'm vaccinated, or no, I'm not vaccinated. Eventually, there will be a requirement.
Right.
I'm not sure what the date is for that, but New York City just announced that as of November 1st, they want all of their employees vaccinated.
Right. And this is, I mean, you know, United Airlines did this for their 67,000 employees, or maybe it was 57,000. And they had, 130 some odd people who lost their jobs? I mean, everybody else is vaccinated. And which raises an interesting question, George, because Delta Airlines 2 days ago backed down to a huge pressure campaign. They're based in Georgia, in Atlanta. And, right-wing and Republican politicians there, they don't want the COVID pandemic to stop because it's crippling the economy, and that makes Republicans very, very happy because Democrats are in charge. And so they did this whole pressure campaign on Delta Airlines. And so Delta Airlines now has stopped the COVID mandate for their employees. I'm telling you, if I was getting on an airplane tomorrow, I'd be on United instead of Delta. And I love Delta. I've got, millions of miles on Delta. I'm a flying colonel. I've been flying that airline since I lived in Atlanta back in the 80s. And but you couldn't get me on a Delta airplane right now because they don't require all their employees to be vaccinated.
I know, and in the enclosed environment of an airplane.
Yeah.
The potency
and
of
this
the virus.
person's going to be handing me a drink? Really?
Yeah. Well, and one more quick thing is that we spoke last week about the fact that the Chicago Police Department, I believe the ordinance and statutes give it a maximum force of 14,500 sworn officers, and we've been several thousand below that for quite a few years.
Right.
Recent retirements in the police department were over 900.
Yeah.
And the most recent graduating class of the academy was only 700 and something. So this issue's got to be resolved because the police department is still shrinking.
I'm with you. We're seeing the same thing here in Portland. But although the one thing that does seem to be constant across police departments is that the people who are retiring, even when they're saying it's because of the COVID requirement, they're the ones who have got enough time in that they can actually take retirement. And so, that's happening. George, thanks for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archive.
It's 45 minutes past the hour. Back with more of your calls on Anything Goes Friday right after this. And welcome back. Let's see here. Oh, by the way, Dave in New Brunswick, I'm going to pick you up in 4 minutes, so hang on. Rob in Milpitas, California. Hey, Rob, what's up?
What's up? I'd like to talk a little bit about foundations and their grant-giving policies vis-a-vis climate solutions.
Okay.
And I'm coming at this because we're creating a smart transit system here in Milpitas, California, down the south end of San Francisco Bay. We're planning on using foundation money for this $60 million project for various reasons, and you can learn all about it on the website. But the real point is that when we started looking for the money, we discovered that only 2% of all the money being distributed by foundations is going towards climate solutions. Now, that 2% I could be happy with because our $60 million project is just not that big a deal. But apparently only 10% encourage people or groups or projects like ours to contact them. The other 90% have a don't call us, we'll call you policy in place.
Which is fairly common among foundations.
That's what I'm learning. So I'd like to push the odds in our favor a little bit by inviting your audience, if they know anybody in the foundation or grant-giving business, to at least take a look on our website. We've got a list of about 25 foundations that look like they would be a pretty good match for this project. Now, this is reduced down from a much, much, much larger number, of course. But these guys, these outfits, these foundations seem like they'd be a pretty good fit. And if you know somebody inside of one of these organizations, just pass along our website and suggest that they take a look at it. The website, of course, is Milpitas PRT, and the PRT stands for Personal Rapid Transit, MilpitasPRT.com.
Okay.
And if you click the button at the top that says Support PRT, it'll take you right to and give you this background information and the list of the 25 candidates.
Okay, that's interesting, Rob. My perspective on this is slightly different, and I'm speaking not just as a theoretician, but I'm also on the board of directors of a foundation that gives away money every year. It's called Vocal, VOQAL.org is the website, and we give away a fair amount of money in 5 cities and around the country. And I would think that from a foundation point of view, rather than spending your revenue or even your corpus, burning your own cash to build green infrastructure, it would be better to spend that money to support political activists who want to change laws or change legislators so that government will, on an ongoing basis, build and maintain that kind of infrastructure. I mean, shouldn't this be the responsibility of government, not private foundations?
Yes, it should be. And yet, although this technology has been quite viable technologically and financially for the last 40 years, the systems that we're approaching, whether they're private funding or whether it's governmental, simply have not stepped up to the task.
Yeah.
So this is a new, innovative way of trying to get a project done to demonstrate the technology.
Okay, Milpitas,
Personal Rapid Transit.
PRT.com. Okay, got it. Rob, thank you very much. Fascinating conversation. We'll be right back. It's 49 minutes past the hour. Stick around. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. So we have a new video up over at ThomHartmann.com. It's about 18 U.S. Code 2384, which is a law that was published back in put on the books on June 25th, 1948. It was updated in 1956, and it's very, very straightforward. It says, if 2 or more persons in any state or territory or in any place subject to the jurisdiction of the United States conspire to overthrow, put down, or destroy by force the government of the United States, or to levy war against them, or to oppose by force the authority thereof, or by force to prevent, hinder, or delay the execution of any law of the United States, or by force to seize, take, or possess any property of the United States, they shall be fined under this title or imprisoned for not more than 20 years or both. Tell me that doesn't perfectly describe what happened on January 6th. Seditious conspiracy. The video's at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. Anything Goes Friday, taking your calls. Hang on just a second, Brian. Let me get back to you. I told Dave I would pick him up next. Dave in New Brunswick. It says you want to disagree with me about protectionism. I wanted to get you in after the break so we could have a little more time to talk. What's up, Dave?
I disagree in part. Basically, my premise is that if you take steel production, we're producing this much steel as we did in 1990, with with a third or half as many employees.
Right.
So just having blatant, carpet tariffs, I don't think it's gonna solve the problem that one of your other callers called in about. But you said that basically our middle class is a bunch of people making around $85 an hour, waiting to lose their jobs and exit the middle class, and our middle class is shrinking. I mean, if we're making the same amount of steel as we did in 1990, that problem is only going to get worse because automation is going to half the amount of people per production. Whereas I think what we need is a society that does things smartly. For instance, an environmental or carbon tax tariff could work better. So that let's say our steel, we have steel companies that are doing electric production right now that are cleaner. It's a cleaner production of steel than competitors around the world. We should tariff the steel that's more dirty, or we should tariff products that are dirty. And then also we should reorganize our economy. For instance, we shouldn't have industrial farming anymore. They've done studies in that over time, organic farms produce just as much food. So
in many cases more, and more nutritious. Up to 50% more nutritious. Dave, let me produce a slightly different frame, because you're right. As technology has improved, a lot of those jobs, even if we brought back all 60,000 factories that have left America since the beginning of the neoliberal era in the 1980s, even if we brought them all back, they would probably employ fewer than half of the people that they did before, just because of automation and advances in manufacturing technology. And I agree that that's not a bad thing. It doesn't provide jobs, but it's improvements in technology are just that's life. But the question I would ask, and this is where I was going to go with Joe Walsh if he had hung on with me, but he chose not to. But is we have a situation now where, for example, here in Oregon, we got a local billionaire. His name is Phil Knight. He's a good guy. He gives a lot of philanthropy to the local community. He helps out Oregon. His company, the company that he started, Nike, does not manufacture shoes in the United States. In fact, they don't manufacture shoes at all. They buy them from whoever the lowest supplier is in Asia, and they move around from country to country wherever the cheapest labor is. And so, a $100 pair of shoes that we pay $100 for here is costing them, say $5 or $10 to be manufactured, and everything else is marketing. It's, he's quite proud of the fact that he's running essentially a marketing
company. A charitable donation to help out his sweatshops.
Right. Yeah. So the question is, how does that help America?
Well, the thing is in theory, we should be. We shouldn't. I don't think we're that far away from automating sweatshops.
No, the same thing is true of Apple. Apple, Steve Jobs and his family made billions of dollars, and he's not alone in that. A bunch of early Apple investors, and they manufacture their products in China. How does that help America? I mean,
here's what I'm saying. I'm
not just talking about the jobs. I'm talking about the whole thing. I mean, if China wanted to take us down because they're pissed off about Taiwan, all they'd have to do is refuse to manufacture any more Apple products. I mean, or
Well, now the production's moving from China to Vietnam.
Exactly.
So the thing is.
So again, how does that help America? I get it helped Steve Jobs. I get it that Phil Knight's become a billionaire because of this. How does that help America? And I'm not just talking about jobs. I'm talking about this larger issue. And this is a conversation we have not had in this country since 1992. That was the last time we had this conversation, was the election of 92, when Ross Perot was saying what I'm saying right now.
And he got 18% of the vote.
He did. He got 19%
I get it,
of the
but
vote.
I'm saying also the world isn't being helped by stuff being shipped in long supply chains either.
I agree.
And
another way that doesn't help America.
What's that?
Another way that it doesn't help America to make things overseas. So where is the benefit to us? Why would anybody defend this?
Germany is in part an exporter because the government subsidizes housing. So a problem with our production is that our housing costs have been jacked up by the banks. They've lowered sales taxes.
Yeah, I don't think that's what makes Germany an exporting powerhouse. I think it's more
it helps a great deal. The housing costs are significantly lower than other parts of Europe and the United States.
No, I get that. I lived there. And the government,
I'm just saying,
because the government builds housing.
We should bring down our housing costs so more people
I agree, but again, to the question of manufacturing overseas, this neoliberal free trade idea that took hold in the 80s and is now the official policy of the United States, how does it help America to make anything overseas? How does that help America? Nobody's ever been able to answer that question for me. It helps Phil Knight. It helps Steve Jobs' family. It helps the billionaires who are in the manufacturing industry. It helps the Walton family because they can buy cheap junk from China and sell it in their stores. But how does it help America?
For a short time, it helped in that inputs for certain things that we used to assemble here.
The only answer that I've heard is what Joe Walsh says. It gives us access to cheap stuff. I would trade cheap stuff for national security and good jobs any day. Bottom line.
I'm not disagreeing with you, but it's still not going to impact, where the middle class is a bunch of people waiting to fall out of it. I think that's the problem that's got to be solved.
Well, yeah, and that doesn't, we could bring factories back tomorrow morning, and if they all were $7 an hour jobs, it wouldn't do much good. So, we also have to have, labor unions and standards and things like that. Yeah, good point, Dave. Thank you.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery, CBD for sleep and pain relief. More info is available at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Ground News, a well-rounded perspective for news readers. More info at ground.news/Tom. Angie, for any project on your to-do list. More info at Angie.com. Dinovite, a whole food supplement for your pet's immune system. More info at Dinovite.com. And ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom.
Today's book in our book club is The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, by this guy, Thom Hartmann. This is from chapter 1, or from the introduction, actually. In 2016, 6% of Americans who were eligible to vote nominated Donald Trump as the GOP's presidential candidate. It was 8% for Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side. Trump went on to be elected president by 26% of eligible voters. The modern American oligarchs have largely stayed in power using three simple elements: explicit and overt racism, massive disinformation campaigns, and voter suppression. No ideas, no push for better schools, hospitals, airports, roads, or bridges, or reform of our health, energy, or financial systems. No promise of more and better jobs. None of these staples of past presidential campaigns can be found in pretty much any Republican advertising today. Instead, the public Republican message is all about race, or the subset of race, religion. Muslim stands in for brown Arab in GOP speak, and immigration, aka brown people from south of our border, and socialism. Meanwhile, Republican secretaries of state across the nation are vigorously purging voters from the rolls. Over 17 million, more than 10% of America's active voters, in just the 2016-2018 period, according to NBC News. After the After the 5 Republican appointees on the U.S. Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act in 2013, 14 GOP-controlled states moved within a year, some within days, to restrict access to the vote, particularly for communities of color, students, and retired people. In North Carolina, for example, 158 polling places were permanently closed in the 40 counties with the most African-American voters just before the 2016 election, leading to a 16% decline in African-American early voting in that state. An MIT study found that nationwide, Hispanic voters wait 150% longer in line than white voters, and black voters can expect to wait 200% longer in line to vote. In Indiana, then Governor Mike Pence's new rigorous voter ID law caused an 11.5% drop in African-American voting. Students are suing for their right to vote, and retired people who no longer drive but care passionately about their Social Security and Medicare are being turned away at the polls by the hundreds of thousands because their driver's licenses have expired. The obvious failure of 40-plus years of Reaganomics and GOP policies to maintain a functional middle class in America has been a problem for the modern GOP. In 1974, for example, the GOP had outright control of only 7 states. The message, elect us and we'll help the rich people, just didn't generally resonate with American voters. It's the reason why, outside of the fluke elections of 46 and 52, Democrats controlled the House of Representatives outright for 3 generations, from 1933 to 1996, and controlled the Senate for most of that time. Desperate to win the presidency for the GOP in 1968, Richard Nixon went so far as to commit treason by torpedoing a peace deal with President Lyndon Johnson that President Lyndon Johnson had worked out with the North and South Vietnamese. According to Abul Hassan Bani Sadr, then president of Iran, Ronald Reagan did the same thing by cutting a deal with Iran whereby they would hold on to the U.S. embassy hostages until after the 1980 presidential election, torpedoing Jimmy Carter's chances of re-election. But in 2000, the GOP changed tactics. After Reagan was almost busted for his part in Iran-Contra, he testified that he had forgotten about details of the program more than 80 times. His growing Alzheimer's spared him an indictment. They realized that getting busted for treason wasn't worth the risk. They needed a plan B, and it was deliciously simple. If most voters don't like what you're selling, then just don't let them vote. Paul Weyrich promoted this idea back in 1980 when he was campaigning for Reagan after co-founding the Heritage Foundation. And indeed, many Republican luminaries, such as William Rehnquist, who went from serving the GOP by standing in polling places and intimidating Hispanic and Native American voters in the 1960s, to becoming Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, rose up through the ranks by participating in Republican-run voter intimidation schemes. Voter suppression became the foundational go-to tactic for the GOP in 2000. Although the GOP attacked Democratic presidential nominee Al Gore with smear and innuendo, ridiculing him for helping write the legislation that created the modern internet, for example, the main thing that got George W. Bush into the White House was voter suppression. His brother, Florida Governor Jeb Bush, and Bush's Secretary of State, Katherine Harris, threw somewhere between 20,000 and 90,000 African-American voters off the rolls. They were able to get the vote close enough. The 5 Republican appointees to the Supreme Court functionally awarded Bush the presidency. The BBC covered this in 2001 in 2 major investigative reports that were seen all over the world, except on any American media. By 2016, the Republican Party had fine-tuned its voter suppression and intimidation systems to the point that they ran like well-oiled machines in nearly 30 states. Between the 2012 and 2016 presidential elections, for example, Ohio had purged more than 2 million voters from its rolls, the vast majority, more than 2 to 1, in heavily African-American and Hispanic counties. The 5 Republican appointees on the Supreme Court ruled in 2017 that they could keep it up. And other states have since adopted their new tactic of caging voters. The book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, by me.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. A couple of things I wanted to just flag for your attention, and then I'll pick up your phone calls, given that it is Anything Goes Friday. We have no guests, and it's just you and me. Sylvia Anders is a close advisor, or was, more correctly, a close advisor to Senator Kyrsten Sinema. She and just short of a half a dozen other people on Sinema's advisory board, I think this was a Veterans Issues Advisory Board. I've seen it characterized that way in the media. They bailed and basically said, you know, we worked really hard to get you reelected. Well, this is what Anders says. She has made a statement. She says, well, definitely we worked very hard to get her elected, and she ran on prescription drug prices and, you know, helping veterans. We have a lot of concerns right now about voting rights, and that really came to us as a very, very significant problem. Without voting rights, we can't have a strong democracy. And right now, the Republicans are really making an effort, especially right here in Arizona, to limit our rights. And there are 500,000 veterans in the state of Arizona, and many of them have PTSD and, you know, physical disabilities that make it difficult, if not impossible, for them to participate in our democracy. So now, by refusing to participate in ending the filibuster, Kyrsten Sinema is also apparently damaging the ability of veterans to vote, which, of course, is the Republicans' plan. Meanwhile, AT&T, this is a great headline. This is from April Cease on the Daily Kos staff, dailykos.com. AT&T has yet to answer for its support of One America Network, and customers have had it. I get, literally, I'm hearing from people, I'm seeing it on Twitter, people dumping their AT&T phone service and going to T-Mobile or Verizon or whoever, Consumer Cellular. Consumer Cellular is big. And they just say, screw it. Why am I giving AT&T money just so that they can hand it over to this right-wing network? And it really is pretty amazing. I mean, AT&T owns Dish and or DirecTV, excuse me. They own DirecTV, and DirecTV has been paying One American News millions of dollars to carry their program on the satellite. I'm on the Free Speech TV network right now. Free Speech TV actually pays DirecTV. It works the other way around. Now, I don't know if that's the norm across all of them or if it has to do with nonprofit or for-profit or whatever the deal is, but AT&T, bottom line, AT&T does not have to pay this network a pile of money. They don't even have to carry them on their network, but the CEO of AT&T decided that he wanted to be like Rupert Murdoch. He wanted to be a right-wing media oligarch. 90% of OAN's parent company, Herring Networks funding, comes from AT&T via direct. And AT&T had a hand in launching this network back in 2013. And this activist, the NAACP president, Derek Johnson, he says, we are outraged to learn that AT&T has been funneling tens of millions of dollars into OAN since the network's inception. AT&T has caused, as a result, has caused irreparable damage to our democracy. Have you dumped AT&T? Send me a tweet about it. It's interesting. Or for that matter, even DirecTV, they have a competitor. It's called Dish. I think, the first step would be to, in fact, they have multiple competitors. The first step would be to say, hey, AT&T, change your policies. Isn't it time to change your policies? And then finally, this note, it's not the $3.5 trillion social spending bill. It's the paid family leave bill. It's the free community college bill. It's the universal pre-K bill. It's the dental, eye, and hearing coverage for seniors bill. It's the child tax credit benefit bill. It's the cheaper medicine bill. It's the tax the rich bill. Let's recalibrate our language here as well. Okay, end of rants. Let's pick up your phone calls here. Jeff in San Francisco. Hey, Jeff, what's on your mind today?
I just want to give kudos to an older gentleman called, and he said we need to change the Pragmatic Party should be the name of the new Democrats.
Okay.
And I have an idea of being pragmatic. Is there's this new policy they've been forced in Australia for a lot of years to save water, and other countries where they take the black water from buildings, which is basically the sewage, and they recycle it. They use the raw sewage to give to farmers for their plants, and we can give a big bunch of money to Kristen Sinema in Arizona, and she could support this system and would put her name on it, go clean with Kristen, and we could do something similar with Joe Biden or Joe Manchin, where he gets money for recycling bins or some kind of a plastic recycling. Reverse the carbon that they've been putting in the air by starting a whole system in something like that,
Yeah.
Give them money.
What you're trying to do here, Jeff, is fill in the blanks in the suggestion I made the other day that Chuck Schumer should, throw $100 billion worth of lard specifically for Arizona and West Virginia into the reconciliation bill, and then dare Manchin and Sinema to vote against their own states.
Exactly.
And you're saying this is where the money should go. Yeah, water's a big deal in Arizona. I'm not sure exactly what the biggest big deal is in West Virginia, but
jobs.
Yeah, there you go. So okay, we're going to federally subsidized jobs in West Virginia. I mean, there's a long history of the federal government hiring people. our military adventures are the biggest example of that, but also, the WPA, the CCC, the TVA, all these agencies that Franklin Roosevelt, generated in the 1930s to get us out of the Great Depression. The federal government
like in the Ozarks.
Yeah, created the Ozarks Jobs Program. I'm with you. There's a lot of possibilities. That's a good one. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you very much. Kent in Eagle Point, Oregon. Hey, Kent, what's on your mind?
Hey, yeah, let's talk about Sherman County, Oregon. They're about 3 hours east of you there, and they went for Trump by 52 points on the last round, and they have been embracing wind energy for about the last 19 to 20 years, and it took them from one of the poorest counties in Oregon to one of the richest. They've got a surplus. They've got they're rebuilding their infrastructure. That's where the tax dollars from the wind generators are going. But what they did was they took and went to the ranchers and farmers there in the area and said, we need an acre of land. We want to put in a wind generator, and we will pay you on a monthly basis to get that. The New York Times had an article out on it. OPB put out a great podcast on it. It's only about 15 minutes explaining how they did it. And the article in the New York Times interviewed a farmer there. They do wheat and winter wheat, stuff like that. And they've got 15 generators. They're getting $5,500 a year per generator.
Wow.
And they've got 15 of them. And so that money provides money for seed for the next year, the repairing, the $10,000 repair on an engine for a tractor of that category.
Yeah, it's like $70,000 a year, $80,000 a year.
It's $82,500 a year.
Yeah, yeah.
And
not bad.
But the point is that was we've got to decide here somewhere. Are we going to change the minds of of minds that cannot be changed, or are we going to dangle these dollars in front of them and say, this can work for you?
Well, this is also a county that voted overwhelmingly for Donald Trump.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. And so, and there's no reason that the parts for those generators or for those turbines cannot be built right here in Oregon. Longview. It was a shot in the arm economically for the city of Longview because that's where all that stuff came in from overseas.
Yeah.
And I worked in infrastructure for 40 years. Dams, I've worked on Bonneville Dam. I worked on a lot of the bridges and buildings there right around Portland. I grew up in Portland. It was a great career. I made decent money. They were all union or prevailing wage jobs. And the amount of jobs that one of those creates is crazy. Yeah. And even the people in that county are saying, there's a interview with the gal who owned a restaurant there. She says, I was dying. There was nobody stopping here. It's a county of like less than 2,000 people. I was dying. When they started building those wind generators, I'm buying a new car. I've remodeled my store and this and that. But the point is I live in Southern Oregon, and I don't know if you've ever been down here, but it is really red. Really red.
I've been there.
Yeah, and you got to understand, you can either beat I'm for green energy. My oldest daughter is a lobbyist for the green energy industry and for elections and so forth. We are all for it. And all of the Eastern Oregon, Central Oregon is prime for solar and wind everything else. But we have a representative there in District 2 that won't hear about it.
What was that, Greg, what's his name? Walden? No.
Well, it was Walden, now it's Bentz.
Yeah.
And but these people and every homeowner in the county of Sherman County gets a check of a little over $500 before Christmas. Everyone.
Wow, because you're generating your own electricity locally. That's
and another thing is there's Judge Thompson was the guy who was a local judge there in the county who orchestrated it and oversaw the whole thing. It was a public-private corporation collaborative like Hoover Dam was and all this. And if I wasn't 70 and I was starting over at 18 years old again, I'd be out there looking for a job building those things because you would work until you're 65.
Yeah,
building this stuff.
No, this is the future. This is absolutely the future. Ken, thank you. Excellent reporting. And tell your daughter, go for it. Ken, thank you very much. Yes, keep being a lobbyist for green energy. We need more of them. We like that. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's Anything Goes Friday, and Brian in Arvada, California, or Colorado, I'm sorry, I lost track of you. I'll pick you up on the other side of this Sirius XM break. And welcome back, Cliff in Cherokee Village, Arkansas. Hey, Cliff, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind?
McConnell is on my mind, and his wife,
Elaine Chao.
She was Secretary of Transportation.
That's correct.
And she resigned, and then she was pardoned by Trump. Do you know what?
Wait a minute. She was pardoned for what?
I have no idea. And then McConnell, when the insurrection first started, he was all against Trump and the insurrection. And after she got pardoned, he did a flip-flop.
She was not pardoned. She was the Inspector General of the Transportation Department wanted to open a criminal investigation into her self-dealing while she was Secretary of Transportation, and Bill Barr and the Trump Department of Justice refused to do that.
Yeah, well, yeah.
So she wasn't pardoned. They just let her get away with her crimes.
Yeah, and then did that change McConnell's outlook on the insurrection?
McConnell benefited tremendously from the Trump presidency, and probably would have continued to benefit from an ongoing, an ongoing thing. It's a good question, Cliff. Thank you for the call, Dave in Claremore, Oklahoma. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, I've got information about a book that I think your program needs to broadcast, and that's yesterday you guys were talking about addictions and dopamine and blah, blah. But The Easy Way to Stop Smoking is a book written by Alan Carr, and the man's dead now. But it has like a 95 to 98% success rate. And I've listened to the book on CD.
So what's his strategy, Dave?
He's at the very beginning he says, don't quit smoking. Keep smoking while you listen to this. But he just talks sense to you. He doesn't try to scare you. He's got one chapter or so where he tells about the downfalls and the bad side of cigarette smoking. But he just talks sense. And at the end of the book, and I've gone through it a couple times. I've listened to more than once. Excuse me. But at the end of my book sessions, at the end of the line, I picked up a cigarette and looked at it and just said, this is doing nothing for me. And I tossed it, and I've never had a withdrawal symptom. I've had no problems. I've given these CDs, and my wife and I have made CDs for people, and they all have success.
Very cool. What's the title of the book again, Dave?
The book is The Easy Way to Stop Smoking by Alan Carr.
Okay.
And
I'll tell you, when I quit smoking, Louise got pregnant with our oldest, and she said, I'm quitting, and if you want to sleep in the same bed with me, you're going to quit too. And I put a pack of Marlboros on top of the refrigerator, and every day I'd walk by it and say, I'm stronger than you are, MFer. And I literally talked to that pack of cigarettes for a couple of weeks. It was not easy, though, I got to tell you.
Well, I just wanted to, since you're on the air and talking to so many people, I just wanted to get that word out.
Okay, it's a good one. Dave, thank you, Dave. Appreciate the call. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. The media is pushing this crazy narrative that with regard to masks and vaccines and COVID and all this kind of stuff, that America is divided. Like, half of us want masks and half of us don't, or half of us want vaccines. It's just not true. 75% of Americans have received at least one dose of vaccine. 70% of Americans think that we should have mask mandates in all of our schools. Only 17%, this is from the latest Pew studies, polling, only 17% of Americans are opposed to mask mandates in schools. And what we have is this tiny fringe that is being cranked. Now we're learning from China as well as from Russia and perhaps other countries, plus the people in, a relatively small number of people, Trump followers, who think that tearing the country apart is a good thing and somehow it'll hurt Joe Biden and hurt the Democrats in the next election. It's crazy. I got a whole video rant about this over at thomhartmann.com that you can check out. And welcome back, Brian in Arvada, Colorado. Hey, Brian, my apologies for losing track of you after I put you on for just a second.
No
What's
worries,
up?
Tom. No worries. Thank you so much for doing this show and for writing your books for the last decade plus. With your IQ, you could obviously do anything you want for work, and you chose to serve the nation in a truly beautiful way. And there are tens of thousands of us that literally love you for it. So on behalf of all of us, Tom, thank you from the bottom of our heart.
Well, thank you, Brian. What's up?
You're very welcome. I wanted to talk to you about Mark Ruffalo's documentary, Invisible Hand. You obviously really saw something in that film because you invited the directors on the show. And it actually inspired me to host a screening of it here in Denver. Technically, Arvada, we're a Denver suburb. A lot colder than Anaheim. I tell you, I just learned the hard way what black ice is. I slipped and spilled coffee all over myself right there in my own driveway.
Yikes.
But, yeah, no, I'm okay, though. But anyway, I'm doing a free screening of Invisible Hand at a local library meeting room on Saturday, November 20th. And anyone listening can host their own screening, by the way. They just have to go to invisiblehandfilm.com and sign up and pay a small licensing fee. And you can take donations or sell tickets to cover that. And anyone listening is also welcome to attend my screening. They can RSVP at my website, which is breakingthesun.com, named because we are breaking the bank when it comes to our ancient sunlight. I learned that from my favorite book.
That's great.
So,
Brian, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I wanted to ask you what it is you saw in the film, and assuming you would, why you would recommend that any listeners in Denver take the time to RSVP and attend the screening.
Well, I have to confess, it's been a while since we had them on, and Louise and I watched the movie, and we watch a lot of documentaries, and I frankly don't remember the premise of this one. Can you recap it for us, Brian?
It was about the rights of nature movement, the idea that an ecosystem can have rights just like a corporation has rights, and it was about that movement. I was going to also ask you how you saw that movement playing out.
Yeah, and I got into the work that Thomas Lindsay and other people like him are doing with the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund and whatnot.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So what was your question, Brian?
Well, I wanted to know how you felt about the rights of nature movement, this concept that,
I think it's one of the few things that can save us. I mean, this is, if you look at indigenous and aboriginal societies all over the world, what you find is that almost without exception, they made the same mistake that we are making as a planet. Take the Maori, for example, the indigenous people of New Zealand. They arrived in New Zealand back about 900 years ago, maybe 1,200 years ago. I'd have to go back and look at my own book. This is all in my book, Threshold. But anyhow, they arrived there on a pristine island that had never been occupied by humans, and that was filled with 50 different varieties of moa birds, which is why they're called the Maoris. It means moa eaters. All these different kinds of moa birds, from the size of an ostrich down to the size of a small chicken. And the birds had no fear of humans. They could just walk up to them and break their necks. And so they went on a 300-year eating binge. And they ended up wiping out all the moa birds, and then their society, devolved into barbarism. They broke into 30-plus warring tribes. They actually started eating each other. This was after they ate every other small mammal they could find. They started eating frogs. They emptied the fish from the waters around New Zealand. And it takes a while for a society to figure out how they've damaged themselves. Eventually, they got around to saying, we need to live in sustainability with our environment. And every indigenous society has reached that point all around the world. And you find these stories all across North America as well. We are doing it, only we're doing it with the whole damn planet. And I think that things like the rights of nature movement are, a step in getting us away from that.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Brian, thanks a lot for the call. Sorry to hit the break there. Thank you very much. Rights of nature are really important. Invisible Hand is the movement, Mark Ruffalo's movement. We'll be right back.
Our book today is Future War, Preparing for the New Global Battlefield by Robert, I believe it's pronounced Latif, L-A-T-I-F-F. This is from the introduction. On a sweltering August day following weeks of heightened tension with Russia over its actions in Ukraine and Syria, and harsh words between the United States and China over actions in the South China Sea, and as workers are preparing to depart the cool of their air-conditioned Manhattan office buildings for the gridlocked highways and subways, several large electric power plants along the East Coast simultaneously experienced dramatic overspeed conditions in their large turbine generators. Plant operators are unable to stop the steam turbines, whose automatic control and data systems have been infected by sophisticated computer malware, and they catastrophically tear themselves apart, cutting power to large segments of the population and industries in the Northeast. Building systems shut down, hospitals switch to emergency generators, trains stop running, traffic lights cease operating, and Wall Street trading comes to a halt. At the same time, 1,100 miles to the south, a massive rocket sits fueled and ready to launch a critical national security satellite when an explosive-laden private aircraft flies at low altitude into the Cape Canaveral launch pad area and, despite repeated warnings, slams into the pressurized fuel tank and solid rocket motors, creating an enormous conflagration. Half a world away, elite commandos equipped with the latest high-technology equipment but unidentifiable as a national army attack U.S. and allied interests near areas of disputed territory. Thus are fired the opening shots of a new war. These hypothetical events represent a radically different style of conflict fought with new tools and against new and unfamiliar enemies. When most people think of war, they imagine soldiers doing battle with other soldiers, employing tanks, artillery, and other recognizable weapons. However, in this century, war has morphed into something we can scarcely recognize, and future conflicts will be qualitatively and quantitatively unlike those of the past. They will be fought using innovative and unusual weapons, many of which, because the technologies have both civilian and military uses, will be available to far more people who are far less skilled in their employment. The so-called democratization of technology has diminished the monopoly of advanced countries on the tools of war. 21st century armed conflicts often have no battlefield in the traditional sense. The concept of opposing armies clashing in deadly struggle but moderated by international conventions of behavior seems a thing of the past. In 1999, Chinese colonels Kuo Liang and Wang Shuangshui predicted that soldiers would increasingly be computer hackers, financiers, drug smugglers, and agents of private corporations rather than members of a military, and that their weapons would include not only airplanes, cannons, poison gas bombs, and biochemical agents, but also computer viruses, net browsers, and financial derivative tools. Their predictions were prescient. Yesterday's wars were, like World War II, about saving civilized nations from maniacal dictators, or like the conflicts in Vietnam and Korea, devoted to a clash of ideologies in the attempt to limit the spread of one hegemon over another. They were big affairs involving large military forces and enormous violence. Today's wars are more about cultural and religious hatreds, using violence as a means to change the hearts and minds of people, among whom the killing occurs with more frequency. Tomorrow's wars will be different still, fought largely for political dominance with stealth and cunning, targeting innocents and institutions, heavily dependent on information superiority, and employing strange new weapons. While we have a highly motivated and well-trained and equipped armed forces that will adapt, we are not prepared as a nation to react well to the inevitably messy and ambiguous situations these new conflicts and weapons will present. We still have no clear idea of what constitutes an act of war in cyberspace now, nor of how we might respond to such an act. It is not enough for the military to be prepared. Neither the public nor its decision makers have yet fully comprehended the significance of the changes in the types of conflict and the tools with which they will be fought. Without question, there will be circumstances when decision makers will find it necessary, or at least think it necessary, to send soldiers into classic boots-on-the-ground combat situations. We will continue to project force with our powerful aircraft, our munitions, and our aircraft carrier strike groups. When war is fought in foreign lands, it could well be against other high-tech armies. However, war will increasingly be more personal and often fought closer to home. It will not lend itself to the traditional massive displays of U.S. firepower. It will affect individuals directly, not as some distant conflict we read about in newspapers or watch in the movies or on the internet. Americans will be targeted on U.S. soil, often, as we have seen in San Bernardino and Orlando, by homegrown terrorists. This form of war will be messy and complex, and it will not lend itself to easy, quick, soundbite solutions. It may not even be clear for a while who perpetrated the violence against us. Was it state-sponsored or a random act of terror? Will we unleash massive destruction on foreign countries in retaliation for attacks by terrorists residing on our own soil? If so, to what end and with what consequences? There are always consequences, whether they be the death or capture of our own troops, unnecessary civilian casualties, or the incitement of more violence. The book Future War by Robert Latif. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program.
So for this week's special video, for the supporters of our program that we put up over at thomhartmann.com, I stepped into the Wayback Machine, and it's really remarkable when you go back over what President Obama accomplished and the Democrats in the House of Representatives and in the Senate, what they accomplished between 2008 and 2010 when they controlled Congress and the White House versus everything that the Republicans blocked. I mean, the Democrats in those 2 years, they saved Chrysler, they saved General Motors, they turned 800,000 monthly job losses into job gains. They increased spending and education spending, decreased the cost of student loans, all kinds of great stuff. But then when the Republicans took over, they blocked a veterans job bill, they blocked Wall Street reform, they blocked immigration reform, they blocked political ad disclosure. And this is just a little tip of the iceberg. You can see the whole video over at thomhartmann.com. And as a tip of the hat to my executive producer, Sean Taylor, we have a couple of audio clips for you. We're going to step into the Wayback Machine just for a moment, and then I'm going to get back to your phone calls. But first, here is Senator Ted Kennedy, and is asking, when does the greed stop? Here he is.
$240 billion in tax breaks for corporations, $36 billion in tax breaks for small businesses, increase in productivity, 42% over the last 10 years. But do you think there's any increase in the minimum wage? No. What is the price? We ask the other side. What is the price that you want from these working men and women? What cost? How much more do we have to give to the private sector and to business? How many $billion more are you asking? Are you requiring? When does the greed stop?
Kirsten Sinema. And then, the flip side of that, of course, how do we pay for federal programs? We pay for them with tax dollars. Franklin Roosevelt famously raised the top income tax rate to 91% on income over what would be about $3 million a year in today's money. And here's what he had to say about all this, about the pushback that he was getting from people like Kirsten Sinema, who are saying, Build Back Better is just fine, but you can't tax rich people to do that. Are you kidding? No, you can't do that.
A number of my friends who belong in the very high upper bracket have suggested to me on several occasions of late that if I am re-elected president, they will have to move to some other nation because of high taxes here. Now, I will miss them very much.
And that needs to be Joe Biden's response. Okay, let's pick up your phone calls here. Bobby in La Puente, California. Hey, Bobby, what's on your mind?
Hey, thank you for that clip. Ted Kennedy, greed. When are we going to break the fever of greed in this nation? Mostly the Republicans. We got to start organizing, unionizing. This Betos that you mentioned a couple of weeks ago going up in that dildo, if I can say that, rocket. Mm-hmm. Okay? You said, why
no, it's every time some Amazon show comes on the TV and they flash the Amazon logo, it's like, you know, in my house, it's like, oh, there's the Amazon penis again. Yeah, no, I get it, Bobby. So, yeah, back to you.
You get Shafter riding along. Yeah. Then on the other side, he's on the Social Security, that, what is that?
Medicare Advantage?
Senior Advantage,
yeah.
You know, disinforming the senior
we should call it
citizens.
Medicare Disadvantage, actually, should be what it's called.
Well, you know, they're doing harm. You know, when are they going to break the greed? We need more of that Ted Kennedy, voices like that. That's what I want to do, shout at the TV.
Yeah.
Look, the union helped me. If it wasn't for the union listeners, I'd be in the penitentiary. That's where my brother, 2 of them, there was no hope. And the union, thank the Creator God. That's what we need, in my opinion, to start organizing. You imagine from Amazon in the South. Let them wake up to the benefits. Sending your children to a doctor, pension, come on, education, you know, for your children. What more does it take for these people to wake up? They're being fleeced.
I think people are getting it. You know, as I said, I keep pointing this out. In 2016, Donald Trump said he was going to raise taxes on rich people so much that his rich friends would refuse to talk to him, and it was going to cost him a fortune. And that's what people elected him to do. He obviously didn't do that. He did the exact opposite of that. And that's why he didn't get, in part, why he didn't get reelected, why he lost by 7 million votes, one of the largest landslides in American history. But, you know, yeah, that's what the American people want, Bobby. They want the rich to pay their damn fair share.
If I can see that uneducated, why can't these educated people see that they're being fleeced?
I think they do. I think they're just,
we'll come around.
Yeah,
right.
They're just dancing to the tune of their own class interests. Bobby, thank you. It's always so nice to hear from you. Thank you very much. Betsy in Klickitat, Washington. Am I saying that right, Betsy?
Yes, you are saying that right. And it's on the Klickitat River, which joins the Columbia about, an hour and 40 minutes east.
Oh, so you're upstream from me. So what's up?
Yes. So I saw an article yesterday about New York State signing with a green hydrogen contractor. I'm not going to mention their name. And I'm hoping that it's a time warp parallel to what George Westinghouse and Nikola Tesla did at the base of Niagara Falls, producing the first AC generating station in America. Mm-hmm. And this is why I have a goal, Tom. I want the Department of Energy to use green hydrogen as a backup power source for the vitrification of low-level nuclear waste at Hanford.
Interesting. So you're killing 2 birds with one stone. One, vitrification is basically embedding it in glass and making it stable for the next million years, right?
Exactly.
Okay, and then that is a process because it. In fact, there was an interesting report on Oregon Public Broadcasting yesterday afternoon or this morning, I forget which, where they were talking about there's a glass recycling facility here in Portland that was built in the 50s, and so they're grandfathered in terms of environmental standards. And so their blast furnace that melts the glass is off-gassing deadly, heavy metals and poisonous compounds, but it's all just going into the air, and it's poisoning the neighborhood around them. But apparently, because of this grandfather clause, nobody can do anything about it. So, I don't know if they're trying to bring moral persuasion or what, but creating glass, if you're going to vitrify nuclear waste, is an insanely energy-intensive process. And you need something that has really, really high energy density, which is probably, you need something much higher than the energy density of even a large battery system. So hydrogen
fits that bill.
That's exactly right. And there's other instances where you need high energy and transportable energy density. So is anybody in Hanford talking about this, Betsy, or is this just your idea?
I am actually, I've suggested it to one of the organizers at Hanford. We got into the conversation originally because some of the workers at Hanford have been exposed to toxic material because of faulty respirators. That's when I started talking to this fellow. And then I've been slowly working on this, Tom. I think that there should be a populist lobby. The Hanford was created out of the New Deal BPA. Yeah. And it's their responsibility to clean up the mess. And I think as a public lobby, we should all get together and do it as efficiently and cheaply and as cleanly. That's why I'm all about green hydrogen. Yeah. And if anybody's curious about what green hydrogen can do, they should investigate Dr. Daniel Nocera at Harvard.
Okay. I'm with you, Betsy. I'm absolutely with you. And I think, hydrogen is and hydrogen, by the way, doesn't have to be burned. There are fuel cells that will convert hydrogen, into water vapor and produce electricity.
And you can store a windmill and solar energy through hydrogen.
That's correct. You generate that power. Although typically windmills and solar work in tandem because the wind blows more consistently at night often than it does during the day. And, of course, during the day, you have the solar power. But, yeah, I get it. And that's what Copenhagen is doing. What Denmark is doing is they're balancing the solar from all their solar panels with all those turbines that are now kind of part of the iconic, beautiful view of Copenhagen Harbor. But, yeah, spot on. Betsy, thank you.
I'm going to keep you informed of my progress, Tom.
Okay, do it. Thank you, Betsy. Valley in Auburn, Alabama. Hey, Valley, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. So great to be on your show.
Thank you.
You're such a beacon of light. You got me through the last presidency with my sanity. And I know that you're a leader and a light worker. And I just wanted to give you some suggestions so that, because it's about fish and about the big ag of fisheries. And it does contribute to climate change.
Are you talking about farmed fishing?
Any type of fishing. I got a master's in fisheries from Auburn University, and I know what they do. And a lot of that stuff that they talk about is marketing terms. So when they say wild fishing, it's really not wild. Yeah, and I'm not talking about indigenous groups of people. I'm talking about big ag.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So pay attention to where your food is coming from. I am with you, Valley. I'm completely with you. It's 45 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. Stick around. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. It's Anything Goes Friday. Back with your calls right after this.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Right after this, it's the Thom Hartmann Program on Anything Goes Friday. And welcome back. Let's see here. Tom in Temecula, California. Hey, Tom, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I wanted to talk about or run something by you, see what you think of the idea of these pharmaceutical companies that make such huge profits based on the research of the universities and others. And it seems to me that we should put on some sort of a royalty, almost like a VAT tax. Every contributor to the process along the way in the development of a given drug should then get a percentage of the profits based on their contribution to the final product.
Yeah, I'm with you. Most of the drugs that are developed in the United States are funded by federal money, and almost all of the original drugs are funded by federal money. The pharmaceutical industry does have a large R&D budget, but they don't use that money to develop brand new drugs. They let the federal governments and universities do that. They use that money to tweak existing drugs so that as they run out of patent and become generics, they have a new patented brand that comes behind that. So when Prozac runs out of patent, they add a hydroxyl group or something someplace to it, it's still just as effective. Maybe it lasts an hour less or an hour longer or whatever, and brand it as something new. I'm sorry, I don't want to give out phony drug names, but you know what I'm saying. And so there was a time when, by and large, we did recover some of that. That all got blown up. I wrote an op-ed about this a couple of weeks ago, and I don't remember the exact date. I did a deep dive on the research on it, and there are links to it in that op-ed about Big Pharma ripping us off. But yeah, I think that we should seriously consider holding. Well, we do actually, in many cases, continue to hold the patents. What they do is they license those patents to the drug companies. Same effect.
That background stuff is still the same, that research. So that's still an ingredient, if you will, of the final product, even if they tweak it. And if it's funded by the federal government, then the federal government should get a kickback for their contribution to the
I'm completely with you. Or at least, I mean, the way the law reads, actually, with the walk-in provisions, is that if they're selling it at such a price for getting ripped off, we can go in and change that. And I think that needs to be strengthened, frankly. And the pharmaceutical industry right now is proposing legislation to weaken that. So excellent points, Tom. Thank you very much for making them. Marco in Los Angeles. Hey, Marco, thanks for listening to KPFK. Although I think they moved on now. So what's up?
What is back when Thomas Paine produced Common Sense, that was illegal. He would have been killed if they could have caught him. And then James Madison made him legal by producing the First Amendment in our constitutional government. Mm-hmm. And then Lewis Hill comes along in 1949, produces KPFA, which breaks up commercials, separates commercial from free speech. And what I'm saying is those three ought to be put together in one class and have that level of education put forth, that's all First Amendment stuff. And then when somebody lies on any broadcast, they get charged, they get fined, and that way you separate the free speech non-commercial from commercial, because commercial broadcasting basically lies.
Well, yeah, I don't disagree that they lie, Marco, but I'm not sure I want the government deciding whether I'm lying or not, particularly if that government is headed up by Donald Trump. But everything else, I'm with you. Yeah, teach the history, absolutely. Thank you, Marco. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. So there are actually some substantial differences between the Taliban, the Afghanistan Taliban, the group that has, that Donald Trump signed what his Secretary of State his Defense Secretary and his National Security Advisor referred to as surrender documents to back in early 2020. There's a difference between the Taliban and ISIS, or even K-ISIS, which is how they're identifying the ISIS group that has emerged in Afghanistan. The main difference is that the Taliban's ambitions are largely confined to Afghanistan. They want to be a regional force. They were the government of Afghanistan before. They want to be the government of Afghanistan again. ISIS, on the other hand, wants to reestablish the entire caliphate across the Middle East, across Northern Africa, across parts of Southern Europe. And this is going to bring these two into conflict. I've got a whole video about this over at thomhartmann.com for folks who support the program. Check it out. And welcome back. Rob in Mesa, Arizona. Hey, Rob, what's on your mind today?
Hey, I originally called about something else, but I want to say something about that last caller talking about, a standard for broadcasting and all that.
Yeah.
I've been thinking about that a long time, too. But you got to get it out of the government. So my solution would be to form an organization that's like a J.D. Edwards, and you sign up for that organization, and they basically monitor you and give you the stamp of approval for truth or not truth.
You mean J.D. Power?
And then have them, J.D. Power, yes.
Yeah.
And so it'd be independent. So that now that's out of the government. Now you subscribe to that.
Yeah, so what happens when that independent organization gets taken over by the Chamber of Commerce? which is overtly right wing. And they now this new organization that is deciding what's true and what isn't true, puts their focus on me. It's like, I get it. Everybody, we have a serious problem with lies in the media. But I just don't see any free market, competitive enterprise, or even government solution to that other than educating people and giving people good information and breaking up the big media monopolies so that we go back to the way it was pre-1996, where the Federal Communications Commission does not allow people who are out of state to own media in state and does not allow single corporations or families to own multiple media outlets in the same city.
Yeah, I agree with that, too. Yeah, you're probably right that the diversification would probably do more good. The original thing that I called about is the lie that's kind of going on about prescription drugs and how they can't, the other caller was talking about, giving universities and that a piece of it. That's fine. They should do that. That should be part of the formula. But to say that, we have to pay list price for all our medicines because they won't be able to innovate, and that's what McConnell said about a week ago.
It's a lie.
Is ridiculous. You know how you innovate when you're a corporation? You sell stock. What's happening now is they're buying back their stock because they're making so much money and artificially jacking everything up.
Right, which jacks up the executive compensation.
Right, and so the lie to cheat Republicans, and I always say they always lie about something so they can cheat. And where's the conservatives about smaller government? Well, when they're receiving the money from the government, suddenly the sky's the limit.
Yeah.
But, when an individual or a person is helping out individuals, they want to cut all that off. But when they're, defense contractors and all these other contractors are receiving money, there's no limit to that.
Yeah, I'm with you. Rob, thank you. John in Seattle. Hey, John, what's up?
Oh, hi, Tom. If I can riff on Climate Solutions, there's an organization in Seattle with that name, and they have a bunch of projects. Their focus is to work on issues work on projects that will give the greatest benefit to the greatest number of people. So for the gentleman who called you about getting a grant, if his push is for personal transportation, he'd be more likely to get a grant if he hooked up with an organization that was focusing on better mass transit, or an organization like Bikes for Peace, which is looking to push bike lanes as are being developed in Seattle.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good one. John, thanks for the heads up on that. I appreciate it. Jeff in Portland. Hey, Jeff, what's up?
Hey, good morning, Tom. Happy Friday. Thanks for another great week of shows. I do want to apologize for misinterpreting your position on Merrick Garland last week. I'm glad we're on the same page. He really does need to uphold the rule of law for us to have a functioning democracy with free and fair elections. And to that point, Congress has to do its job, too. It's similar to what you've been saying and writing for a long time, but I do recommend Ari Berman's piece in Mother Jones this week. Republicans are planning to hijack the next election. Dems are squandering their chance to stop them.
Amen.
But yeah, and Tom, assuming that Garland, Biden, and the Dems take the steps to protect and expand voting rights, besides the women's vote, which was key in 2020, I think we can increase and expand the youth vote and the working class vote, which you talked about with Joe Walsh earlier. We just can't let Manchin's disingenuous rhetoric sabotage and water down this reconciliation bill. He's using a few thousand dead-end coal mining jobs to stand in the way of putting out the global fire that fossil fuels have wrought. And in my opinion, Tom, Biden and the Democratic leaders should be reaching directly out to these miners and other West Virginians, assuring them there's going to be a just economic transition. Millions of new jobs are going to be created, sustainable jobs that, as you say, are going to make us competitive in the 21st century. So to that end, do you think President Biden's enlisting organized labor leaders efforts enough in this fight? I haven't really heard much from, there's a lot of labor unrest right now.
Well, I doubt he's going to get much from the coal miners union, but I agree with you, Jeff. If he went into West Virginia and said, hey, would you rather be breathing coal dust all day long as part of your job, or would you rather be building, nice stainless steel wind turbines or installing solar panels on people's rooftops and making even more money at doing it, that he would probably be receiving a warm welcome. Jeff, thanks a lot for the call. Hey, special thanks to Louise Hartman, Sean Taylor, Nate Atwell, Jamie Holly, Joyce the Hammer, Nance Nate, Nigel Peacock, Sue Nethercutt, Patrick White, Geraldine Halbert, Ron Hartenbaum, Chase Spross, Nicholas Miller, Pat Sweeney, Jabbermocky, Jay LeBlanc, Connor Arroyo, and Carmen Verde, all the folks who helped make this program work. Thank you. And thank you to you for letting our stations know that you're listening. Have a great weekend.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
Get out there, get active, tag, you're it. See you on Monday.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery, CBD for sleep and pain relief. More info is available at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Ground News, a well-rounded perspective for news readers. More info at ground.news/Tom. Angie, for any project on your to-do list. More info at Angie.com. Dinovite, a whole food supplement for your pet's immune system. More info at Dinovite.com. And ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom.